Chapter 259. The entire Danyang city was completely covered by a sea of monsters. Humans were originally at the top of the food chain, but at this moment, they had become food that the monsters were fighting over. On the street, a giant black horse with crimson flames on its hooves was running at high speed. Wherever it passed, it left a long trail of flames, igniting everything that could be ignited. No cars or buildings could stop its advance. They were either knocked away by the horse or melted by the flames. A human man was trampled to the ground by one of its hooves, and the man's lungs were crushed. Amid the terrified screams of the people around, the monstrous horse opened its mouth and swallowed half of the man's head. The explosion covered most of the horse's face. In the sky, a 3-meter-long corpse bird with only bones and rotten flesh lingered around a tall building. In a room of the building, a family of 3 trembled as they hid behind the wall. The parents kept comforting their children, but even their faces were pale, and their eyes were full of helplessness and confusion. At this moment, a huge bony claw broke through the wall and grabbed the child's mother. The family of 3 screamed as the mother's head was twisted off by the bony claw of another corpse bird. It then threw the head into its own mouth. More than a dozen corpse birds flew from other directions. In a frenzied fight, the woman's body was completely dismembered in the blink of an eye, and each of them swallowed part of it. The next moment, the corpse birds, stimulated by the smell of blood, rushed to the building, broke through the outer walls, and drilled into the people's rooms. The smell of blood filled the air, and desperate screams resounded through the sky. On the highway, there were congested or broken cars everywhere. People were either driving recklessly or getting out of their cars and running on their feet. However, even they didn't know that they had nowhere to run. Far away on the highway, a huge sandworm crawled out from the ground. Its body was as big as a small mountain, and it was trembling. It exposed its mouth part that looked like a pulverizer. Then, it opened its mouth and swallowed the humans and cars on the highway. Its huge mouthpiece covered the entire road, and it looked like the entire highway was leading to the sandworm's mouth. The sandworm opened its mouth wide and swallowed all the people along the highway as if it was eating noodles. Wherever it passed, all the people were swallowed. Flesh and blood covered the sandworm's entire mouthpiece. In the city square, huge gorillas that looked like King Kong were hunting. They surrounded a huge artificial lake and kept throwing dead people into it. A King Kong grabbed a girl and pressed his thumb and index finger on the girl's head. Then, he twisted his wrist and twisted the girl's head off. He opened his mouth excitedly and threw the girl's head into his mouth like a candy. Then, he covered the girl's head with his mouth as if he was drinking a drink and kept sucking. The surrounding gorillas also did the same, each killing the prey in their hands. Then they threw their corpses into the huge artificial lake. A young man struggled hard and actually escaped from King Kong's hands. He screamed and ran away, but before he could take a few steps, a giant palm fell from the sky and smashed his body into a pile of meat paste. The owner of the giant palm, a King Kong, picked up the meat paste with a look of disgust and threw it into the artificial lake. On the other side, a large group of gorillas suddenly became excited. More than a dozen gorillas were holding containers in their hands. Inside the containers were all kinds of humans. They were like insects in cans. They were caught by the gorillas and then rudely thrown into the containers. Amidst the excited roars, the Vajras poured the containers out. The height of more than 10 meters directly killed most of the people who fell out of the containers. The few people who survived were quickly crushed and torn apart by the surrounding Vajras. Then, amidst the cheers of the King Kong, a huge fire dragon descended from the sky. He roared and opened his mouth toward the artificial lake. A large mouthful of white flames spewed out, directly heating the entire lake. Countless corpses floated up from the bottom of the lake. Amidst the cheers of the monsters, a human hot pot officially began. The dead were dancing, and hell was singing. Similar scenes played out across the land of the Eastern Sun. All the humans who saw all this through the screen were either frightened or angry. The monster army in front of them, whether in terms of numbers or strength, was completely beyond their imagination. In the command room of the Sea Dragon aircraft carrier, the huge screen was broadcasting the scene from hundreds of kilometers away. The broken city, the rampaging monster army, and the crowd was like a buffet. This was the scene that everyone present could see. Suddenly, the camera shook and a huge head of a corpse bird appeared on the screen. The next moment, the entire screen was covered in snow. The last thing that could be seen was the completely rotten mouth of the corpse bird. Yang Guang looked at the screen with a solemn face and asked Li Shan, "Where are the other reconnaissance planes? Bring their cameras here." "There's no more." Compared to Yang Guang's calmness, Li Shan was much worse. He shook his head with a pale face. "All the reconnaissance planes have been destroyed. The one just now was the last one." Yang Guang frowned deeply. "Bring up the satellite image from the headquarters." The screen flashed, and the image taken by the spy satellite high in the sky above Mount Fuji appeared. However, other than countless tentacles, the exploding blood mist, the cracked ground, and a huge bloody hole, nothing could be seen. Li Onping and his psychic incarnation had chased the Roshan deep into the ground under the continuous attack. Conventional detection methods could no longer monitor him. Moreover, since the first attack on Mount Fuji, Yang Guang could no longer contact Li Onping. In that kind of attack, even the specially reinforced communication equipment had been damaged. Damn it! Yang Guang slammed his palm on the control panel. He could not understand what was going on at all. First, there was the inexplicable change in Kyoto. Then, there were powerful enemies one after another. Finally, there were the sudden appearance of those monsters. "What's going on? I wonder how Sir is doing." Yang Guang did not know the answer. The only thing he knew was that the entire Xia, the ice fortress, the southern countries, and all the countries on the eastern continent were on full alert and had entered a state of combat readiness. All the main combat ability users of the Xia Dragonfinch were on the move, ready to face all kinds of attacks at any time. Yang Guang and the aircraft carrier fleet stayed on the East China Sea, ready to support Li Onping at any time. Right at this moment, a commotion could be heard from the deck. Yang Guang looked through the glass and saw people walking out from a pitch-black teleportation gate. Although the army of monsters caused great damage to Danyang, they were no different from ordinary animals in front of Li Onping. They could not even get close to Li Onping before they were crushed into powder by the wind generated by him and his psychic incarnation. However, at this time, Li Onping's body had returned to its original state. With the end of his explosive state, Li Onping's physical fitness had returned to 29.9. Now, his psychic incarnation was the main attacking force. However, under the constant attacks of the Nianqi clone and Li Onping himself, the pink mountain of flesh had turned into a sea of blood. The flesh and blood that was hundreds of meters deep had been directly smashed, leaving a huge flesh hole on the ground. Now, every time his psychic incarnation attacked, it would cause great damage to Gray's core. However, as Gray woke up more and more, his regeneration speed became faster and faster. On the other hand, Li Onping's explosive state had ended. Under this situation, Li Onping's destructive speed decreased. If this continued, Li Onping would not be able to destroy Gray's core when he completely woke up. He frowned and stopped attacking with his psychic incarnation. Then, his body turned transparent and entered the mountain of flesh like a ghost. He kept sinking toward the bottom of the core. Li Onping looked up and saw that the tentacles that had been destroyed earlier had grown back again. They had also changed their shape. All of them were more than 10 meters thick and 10 times thinner than before. Their speed was also much faster. The tips of the tentacles kept secreting purple poisonous gas and venom. Obviously, they had evolved to adapt to Li Onping's speed. Li Onping smiled coldly as he looked at the countless tentacles that were rushing toward him. He did not expect that he would be forced to this point when he came to Danyang. Li Onping's uniform had long been blasted into pieces, but because of the atmospheric armor, his body looked like he was wearing a white combat uniform. Under Li Onping's control, the white combat uniform slowly revealed a hole in Li Onping's chest. A sparkling and translucent gem drilled out of it and appeared in Li Onping's palm. This was the only thing that he carried with him. He had been deliberately protecting it with a virtual field. coupled with the gem's sturdiness. It was the only thing that was intact. It was a gift from the League of Stars, the spiritual gem. Chapter 260. The spiritual gem could grant the user the power of a queen of heaven's 5th rank for 12 hours. It was a tool that could turn a mortal into a god. Li Onping tossed the spiritual gem into his mouth. He felt that the spiritual gem, which was originally abnormally sturdy, instantly turned into a cool stream of air after entering his mouth. A unique energy flowed through Li Onping's body. An inexplicable light shone from Li Onping's eyes. The entire world seemed to have changed. Li Onping had never been able to see the world as clearly as he did now. His consciousness scanned hundreds of kilometers around him. As his attention changed, every atom, every molecule, all kinds of rays in the air as well as magnetic fields, electric fields, and even all kinds of energy radiation. Everything was displayed so clearly in front of Li Onping. He felt as if his eyes could see through everything. Is this the world in the eyes of the Queen of Heaven? Even though the tentacles were right in front of him, even though the threat of death was right in front of him, Li Onping's eyes did not show the slightest hint of confusion or panic. There was only curiosity in his eyes. At this moment, Li Onping was like a newborn baby, looking at the world with curious eyes. His right hand gathered the power of the nihility force field. His left hand was the Queen of Heaven's spiritual force field. Li Onping did not know how the Queen of Heaven used her power, but he knew he could do it. Li Onping stretched out his hand and gently brushed the air. Wherever his hand passed, the nihility force field enveloped the air in front of him. With the help of the nihility force field, things that were originally difficult to see with the naked eye were now visible in Li Onping's mind. Molecules, atoms, nuclei, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Oxygen, nitrogen, radon, helium, neon, argon, krypton, and xenon in the air. Li Onping could even use his nihility force field to envelop them. Then they began to move, collide, and converge. Suddenly, an inconceivable power rose from Li Onping's palm. A light shone from the ground, and in the next moment, it lit up the entire sky. Our Master Federation, Sky City. The 5 aptitude users of the Virtual Mathematics Department were all present. In other words, the images and voices of the 5 aptitude users of the Virtual Mathematics Department were all gathered in the conference room of the Sky City through high-definition projection and network. On the round table in the conference room, the only empty seat belonged to Jane. Seated at the head of the table was an individual wearing a monocle, snow-white hair meticulously combed, dressed in well-ironed female clothing. She was precisely the head of Virtual Numbering Service, over 70 years of age, but her way of doing things was still known for being unyielding, one of Virtual Numbering Service's Level 5 ability users, Judy M. She said, "I think everyone knows what this emergency meeting is about." Ever since the appearance of the Butcher, a series of great changes had taken place in the Eastern world. Furthermore, the changes in Dongyang clearly have something to do with him as well. A young man with blonde hair, wearing a tuxedo and gold-rimmed glasses, who looked like an ancient aristocrat, said, "Do you suspect that what the Empress said is true? According to the satellite images, a large number of unknown creatures have appeared in the entire Eastern Sun City. They are indeed similar to humanoid monsters." This man's name was Lestat, and he was the one who had participated in the meeting held by the Empress. He and Judy were the only 2 people who were present in person at this meeting. Judy M. did not comment on Lestat's words. There's still no concrete evidence as to whether or not the humanoid monster incident is related to Li Onping, so we can't make a conclusion. However, the power that Li Onping has displayed has already seriously threatened the balance of the world, threatening the safety of every citizen of the Federation. The President has already spoken to me personally. The Federation cannot tolerate this kind of uncontrollable threat to continue growing. Is it going to be a war? A middle-aged man dressed like a cowboy chuckled. As he spoke, he picked up the wine bottle in his hand and took a sip. After all, Li Onping is only one person. Although he's strong, he's only one person. Compared to him, I feel that the Emperor's side is more troublesome. The number of level 5 ability users in the League of Stars is still a mystery. As for what Shang Jinhai's ability is, the League of Stars has kept it a secret until now. We don't know either. No, I feel that Li Onping is the biggest threat, Lestat said. Although the League of Stars is strong, their strength is at most on par with ours. However, Li Onping is different. In the past year, everyone has seen the increase in his strength, right? If next year, as long as his growth rate is maintained above 30%, I'm afraid that we won't even have the chance to fight him in the future. Just as the upper echelons of the Imaginary Number Agency were arguing about Li Onping's attitude, a staff member suddenly barged in. As soon as he entered, he felt two enormous pressures pressing down on his body, making it difficult for him to move. It was as if he would die in the next second. However, the pressure disappeared as quickly as it came. Judy glanced at the staff member and frowned. Didn't we say that we were in a meeting? If there's anything, we could talk about it later. Sir, there's a new situation in Donyang, the staff member said in a panic. Judy asked, what's the situation? There's a high-energy reaction in the capital. According to the tests, there's a large-scale nuclear fusion reaction and explosion. After saying this, the countenances of the 5 people present changed at the same time. The terrifying pressure once again came from Judy and Lestat. That staff member could only continue while trembling. According to the working group's calculations, the power of the explosion is equivalent to a hydrogen bomb with a yield of 50 megatons. At this moment, the entire meeting room fell silent. The terrifying explosion occurred with Li Onping as the center. The shock wave instantly destroyed the surrounding flesh and blood. The high temperature of over 350 million degrees melted everything in front of it. A huge mushroom cloud soared into the sky. Within a range of several hundred kilometers, be it on the ground or underground, everything was instantly turned into ashes. All the monsters were also melted by the raging flames. The air seemed to have turned into raging waves, and a hurricane swept through half of Donyang Island. The terrifying mushroom fire cloud was several tens of kilometers high. Even Yang Guang could see it. The electromagnetic disturbance produced by the thermonuclear reaction swept through the entire planet in an instant. Within 3,000 kilometers, all the airplanes, missiles, radars, and communication equipment were affected. Countless airplanes had temporarily lost contact. Yang Guang's aircraft carrier strike group was the first to bear the brunt. A large part of its electronic system was damaged. The radars could not be operated, and communications were cut off. It was such a terrifying explosion, but Li Onping, who was in the center of the explosion, was completely unharmed. Not only was he unharmed, but everything within a 1-meter radius of him was like a calm harbor. Just 1 meter away, endless light, heat, and shock waves were constantly sweeping back and forth. Shock waves were the horizontal movement of gases. Temperature was the intensity of the thermal movement of molecules. With the help of the Heavenly Queen's spiritual force field, Li Onping's nihility force field was able to operate at the atomic level. Regardless of whether it was the high temperature or the shock waves, the rioting molecules were instantly pacified and returned to calmness. The 1-meter radius around him was like the eye of a storm. It was even calmer than anywhere else on this planet. Regardless of whether it was the temperature or the airflow, there were no fluctuations at all. All the tentacles and flesh above Li Onping's head had disappeared. The danger from before had been completely resolved. However, under Li Onping's feet, within a radius of several hundred kilometers, the pink mountain of flesh had only been vaporized to a depth of a few kilometers. Even if it was only the core of ash under his feet, it was still as vast as a mountain range. Such an intense explosion was only the size of cut to him. There had never been a moment where the difference in strength caused by the size of their bodies was as obvious as the difference between Ash and Li Onping. At this moment, Ash had displayed the word huge to the extreme. The strength produced by his huge body made Li Onping's series of attacks unable to take him down. What was even more troublesome was that, as the explosion slowly stopped, the high temperature gradually disappeared. The The surface of the mountain of flesh was wriggling again. Layers of dead skin and dead flesh were replaced. Ash's regeneration speed seemed to have become faster. However, Lianping did not place his hopes on this attack. His mind received the information from the psychic incarnation. His eyes seemed to have seen through layers of space and arrived at the lowest level of the mountain of flesh. Chapter 261. All the countries were shaken by the events that happened in Danyang City. However, before this, they were only shocked, nervous, and worried. When the monster army appeared in Danyang City, they felt that they had lost control. When the explosion with a yield of 50 million tons happened, all the upper echelons of the countries felt fear. Amstead Federation, Sky City. Reports about the monsters in Danyang City and the assessment of the explosion in Kyoto were sent to Judy M and the other level 5 ability users at the fastest speed. It's like an army that ran out from hell. Looking at the satellite images in his hand, the one who spoke was a muscular man in a military uniform. He had a shaved head and explosive muscles all over his body. He looked like the Terminator. The man was called Giant Shield, and he was the #1 close combat ability user in the virtual organization. He was also the #1 fighter in the virtual organization. Judy M said, "The president wants us to assess the threat level of these monsters so that we can make targeted arrangements." The middle-aged man in cowboy attire drank as he said casually, "What's there to assess? Haven't those experts already written the assessment report? Conventional weapons are ineffective and ability users below level 4 are unable to resist. If these damn things come to the Federation, it'll definitely be an unprecedented disaster." A lady with bright blonde hair and an aristocratic aura shrugged and said, "The whole of Danyang City has become a world of monsters. So, Lianping is saving the world?" Lestat said, "Vivian, we still can't be sure if all these changes are caused by Lianping or Xia. A hydrogen bomb with a yield of over 50 million tons. In the eastern continent, only the Ice Fortress or Xia would be able to possess such a powerful nuclear weapon." Vivian said sarcastically, "So, you're suspecting that Xia dropped the hydrogen bomb and killed Lianping?" Lestat shrugged and said, "Lianping was once at the center of a nuclear explosion in the Moon City, but he didn't die. With the regenerative ability he's showing now, I don't doubt that he'll be able to withstand the attack of this hydrogen bomb. In fact, he might even be the one who gave the order for this attack." Giant Shield frowned and said, "But the satellites and radars didn't detect any carriers or intercontinental missiles. How did that hydrogen bomb appear in the capital? And how did it explode?" Lestat said, "Many ability users can do this. For example, Xia's new 5th level ability user, Emma, can do this with her teleportation ability. Moreover, she had already appeared in Jingdu before. It is very likely that she was the one who delivered the hydrogen bomb." The middle-aged man in denim said, "Even if it was Lianping's order and Xia dropping the hydrogen bomb, so what? Danyang City has completely fallen. We shouldn't act rashly before we have sufficient evidence." Lestat stood up and chuckled. "You still don't understand? This would be a change of era. The incident in Danyang was like a fuse that would completely break the balance between the East and the West. In the past 200 years, the major powers of the Western continent were far ahead of the Eastern continent in terms of military power and ability users. Even all the countries in the Eastern continent had a history of being colonized by us. But because of the appearance of nuclear weapons, 5th level ability users, and the League of Stars, the balance was balanced. There was also the economic crisis, the energy crisis, the new energy technology, and various other reasons. Our power retreated from the Eastern continent. But there is no doubt that this is a chance to make a comeback. Because of Lianping, the 5th level ability users in the Eastern continent died in large numbers due to internal strife. The League of Stars and Lianping are at odds with each other, and even most of their power has been withdrawn from the Eastern continent. The codification state is busy cleaning up the monsters in the country and can't even take care of itself. Tyrol is already on the decline and is no longer a cause for concern. And Lianping, that butcher, has now given us the best excuse." Giant Shield laughed. his ferocious face revealing a sinister smile. He touched his bald head and said, "Are you saying that the World War is about to start again?" No. Although the Eastern continent is now unprecedentedly weak, Li Onping is still very powerful. As long as he is here, it is impossible for an all-out war to break out. Speaking up to here, Lestat revealed a cold smile. But although Li Onping is powerful, he is also very weak. In terms of pure strength and speed, no matter how strong he is, we still have countless ways to deal with him, don't we? Looking at the other 4 5th-level ability users, Lestat said, "Everyone, once Li Onping dies, the Eastern continent will fall into chaos. You should all be able to foresee it, right? I suggest that the Federation make arrangements for this as soon as possible. In the future, we will be able to obtain the greatest benefits." Looking at everyone who had sunk into deep thought, Judy Arnold coughed and said indifferently, "I will report your suggestions to His Excellency the President. However, the current global situation is tense, so I ask that you all maintain contact with the headquarters at all times. Please bring trackers and communicators with you at all times. Don't wander around randomly." Speaking up to here, she deliberately glared at Giant Shield and the man in cowboy clothes. The two smiled awkwardly and cut off the network. At the same time, similar emergency meetings were held in various countries around the world. Because the time was too short and the series of changes in Danyang City was too fast, most of these meetings didn't have any results. However, more or less, they all showed hostility towards Li Onping and Xia. No one could sit idly by and watch a powerful country rise up like this. Even more so, no one could ignore the threat brought by Li Onping. In addition, Xia's military actions against Danyang City had caused great disgust among all the Western countries. And among the common people, before the next day, all kinds of news reports had already appeared on the internet, television, and other major media outlets. News about Xia invading Danyang City, dropping hydrogen bombs in Kyoto, and even experimenting with biological weapons in Danyang City were all written up. All kinds of news, both real and fake, flooded the internet. Li Onping's name was mentioned countless times. This dictator of the Eastern continent, the Butcher, was drowned by the saliva of countless netizens. Of course, because of the Western world's restrictions on intelligence, most of the common people didn't even know that Li Onping was an ability user, let alone Li Onping's combat power. Only a few high-ranking officials or well-informed people were truly aware of Li Onping's situation. Therefore, many groups jointly wrote a letter asking the government to send troops to help Danyang City defeat Xia. It would be best if they could kill Li Onping to maintain world peace. Of course, the government wouldn't be so hasty, but they wouldn't stop the activities of these groups. There were all sorts of articles criticizing Great Xia, and naturally, Li Onping's articles were endless. After that, there were even a series of incidents in which the Xia people were attacked and sexually assaulted by local residents in the Federation and Codification Nation. There were also many Xia people who worked and studied in the Western continent who were fired for no reason, sexually harassed, and deliberately made things difficult for them. Some shops owned by Xia people were robbed, and a series of racist incidents occurred. Originally, the Xia people's status in the Western world was lower than the local people, and it was normal for them to be discriminated against. The incident in Danyang City magnified this conflict. However, what happened in Danyang City changed the attitude of the Western leaders once again. Li Onping was still unaware of the changes in the Western world, and he wasn't interested in knowing. There was only one goal in his mind from the beginning to the end, and that was to kill Gray. Li Onping's body quickly floated toward the mountain of flesh below his feet. After a few seconds, he had landed on the surface of the mountain of flesh. The high temperature evaporated all the blood and water. The mountain of flesh below Li Onping's feet constantly wriggled, replacing layers of dead flesh with new living flesh. Hundreds of kilometers below Li Onping's feet, the psychic avatar stopped and showed its physical body. Red blood wrapped around the psychic avatar, and it seemed to be inside a blood vessel. Around the core of the mountain of flesh, there were countless blood vessels and nerves connected to control Gray's entire body. All kinds of energy could be seen being transferred to Gray's core above the psychic avatar's head. Gray's pink core was above the psychic avatar's head. It stored all of his main consciousness and controlled Gray's entire body. So far, Li Onping had been trying to destroy the core, to kill Gray before he woke up. However, after a series of attacks, the effect on Gray was negligible because Gray was too big. Even just the core was the size of a mountain. As Gray's core, its sturdiness was beyond imagination. Even the big explosion just now could only shave off a few hundred kilometers or a few thousand meters of the mountain of flesh. Compared to Gray's size, it was negligible. What was more troublesome was that after every attack by Li Onping, Gray's body would quickly regenerate. As Gray woke up, the regeneration speed would become faster and faster. Perhaps if Li Onping had enough time, he could slowly destroy the core under his feet within the 12 hours of the psychic gem. However, he obviously didn't have that much time now. The whole of Danyang was shaking more and more. All kinds of monsters were emerging, and countless lands were rising and sinking. A few cities were turned into wreckage within a breath of Gray's time. Li Onping didn't have much time left. Therefore, he decided to use another method. The psychic avatar raised its hands and held the pink core above its head. Because of the huge difference in size, it looked like an ant trying to move a car. However, in the next moment, there seemed to be some changes in the air. Countless atoms and molecules collided with each other, and a powerful force rose from under the psychic avatar's feet. Chapter 262. Under the feet of the psychic avatar, the smaller atoms in the air were undergoing nuclear fusion under the high pressure of the nihility energy field. As a result, heavier atomic nuclei were formed. The changes in the atomic nuclei were accompanied by the release of energy. This contained a huge amount of energy. The change from lighter atomic nuclei to heavier atomic nuclei was called nuclear fusion. Just like how the sun emitted heat, it was a type of nuclear fusion. Nuclear energy was also the strongest source of energy that humans could achieve at the moment. Now, an unprecedented and intense nuclear fusion reaction was taking place under the feet of the psychic avatar. Relying on the nihility energy field and physical attributes that were stronger than his main bodies, in addition to Li Onping's deliberate indulgence, the nuclear fusion reaction this time was countless times stronger than the one that Li Onping's main body had triggered previously. The endless energy in the atomic nuclei was converted. A terrifying tail flame shot out from under the feet of the psychic avatar, turning into an upward driving force. This was equivalent to amplifying Li Onping's own strength through nuclear fusion by thousands or even tens of thousands of times, turning into an almost unstoppable brute force. Originally, with such a huge driving force and the psychic avatar holding Gray's core with both hands, the psychic avatar would be like a steel needle piercing deeply into Gray's core. However, because of the nihility energy field, the psychic avatar looked like he was only holding on with two hands. However, the nihility energy field that was fully expanded the area of effect of the force to tens of square kilometers. Like a pair of hands, he wanted to push Gray's core out. Hundreds of kilometers above the psychic avatar, Li Onping stood still on the spot. However, he suddenly felt a terrifying pressure acting on his body. The bones in his hands were the first to break. Then blood flowed out from his ears and eyes. He felt like he was going to be squashed at any moment. It turned out that after the psychic avatar suffered damage, his body would also suffer the same damage. At this moment, the psychic avatar wanted to push Gray's core upwards. The nuclear force that was thousands or tens of thousands of times stronger than the main body strength was transmitted to the core through his body. It felt like he would be crushed into powder in the next moment. If it was Li Onping himself who did this, he would have been turned into a pile of meat patty. However, this was the first time Li Onping's psychic incarnation had been hurt. It also let Li Onping know that the psychic incarnation would not really be hurt, but the damage it suffered would be transferred to Li Onping. Fortunately, The Nianqi incarnation was far stronger than Li Onping's physical body, so the transferred damage was not fatal enough. At the end of Li Onping's explosive state, he had left behind 10,000 souls in case of emergencies, just in case. Under the nourishment of soul energy, Li Onping's bones in his hands kept repeating the process of healing and breaking. On one hand, the Nianqi body was under great pressure and continuously transferred the damage to Li Onping. On the other hand, the soul power was constantly healing Li Onping's injuries. With a cry, Li Onping felt pain in his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. Just now, a few of his ribs were broken and his internal organs were bleeding profusely. The psychic incarnation on the ground also bent its arms and curled up into a ball. However, there was no fear in Li Onping's eyes at all. He had long been used to being injured and used to all kinds of fatal injuries on his body. His head had been blown up, his body had been torn apart, and his heart had been crushed. In comparison, these injuries were nothing. Now, the intense pain all over his body was nothing. With a roar, Li Onping suddenly stood up. Hundreds of kilometers below, the psychic incarnation also followed this roar and straightened its back again, slowly pushing the entire core upwards. Rumble. Li Onping, who was at the top of the core, was still standing at this time. However, he was almost covered in blood. Blood was constantly spurting out from his mouth, ears, nose, and eyes under the huge pressure. However, his eyes were fixed on the huge mountain of flesh under his feet. His feet did not move at all, as firm as a stone statue that had stood for thousands of years. Only thick blood was squeezed out from his body and gathered under his feet, forming a huge pool of blood. With an almost unbelievable strength, accompanied by the rumble of the earth, countless blood vessels, nerves, and muscle fibers around the core were torn apart. The huge mountain of flesh was rising up at an increasing speed. Lost State Canonization Province, Satellite Observation Center. A staff member had just brewed a cup of coffee. After taking a small sip, he let out a satisfied sound. His hands were tapping on the keyboard, constantly observing the various numbers displayed on the screen. Beside him, a colleague yawned and complained. "What's wrong with the higher-ups? I even asked Lisa to go on a date after work, but they actually want me to stay and observe the satellite images." Another person laughed and said, "Don't complain. I heard that there's a war in the Eastern continent, and they even used nuclear weapons. The Knights are understaffed and need our help. Aren't the spy satellites enough? When do they need our help? At most, we can measure the environment and terrain. Can those yellow-skinned monkeys fight and destroy the entire Eastern Sun Island? Speaking of Eastern Sun, you should really go there to play. The girls there, TSK, really." Before this person could finish his words, there was a puffed sound. His colleague spat out all the coffee in his mouth onto the screen. He looked at the screen as if he had seen a ghost. "What's wrong with you? See if I'm hallucinating," the person muttered. "Why is the altitude of the capital area rising continuously? Damn it, is there a problem with the instrument?" In the Our Master Federation's Sky Castle, a similar situation was happening. A mountain of flesh the size of a mountain was being pushed upward by Li Onping and flew into the sky. From the visual effect, it was almost as if a mountain was being lifted up and flying into the sky. The size of the mountain was far greater than the Sky Castle. Judy Arnold looked at the satellite image with a pale face. She looked at the landmass that was almost larger than Mount Fuji rising rapidly into the sky. She said in disbelief, "What's going on?" At this moment, a staff member shouted, "I found him." The camera on the big screen changed directly to the highest point of the mountain of flesh. A figure covered in blood was standing there motionlessly. Judy said in surprise, "It's Li Onping. It's him. Is he dead? Can someone tell me what he's doing there? What's going on? Why is a mountain in the sky?" Just then, the person on the screen turned his head as if he had sensed the satellite's observation. He turned his neck in the direction of his satellite's camera. His eyes seemed to be able to see everyone on the screen, giving off a creepy feeling. Judy was shocked. "What's going on? Did he sense us?" A staff member said, "Impossible. The satellite is 800 kilometers away from him. He can't have sensed us." But at this moment, the screen suddenly distorted. Then, after a few flashes, the screen turned completely black. Lian Ping's whereabouts and images were completely gone. Judy said angrily, "What's going on?" A staff member was puzzled. "I don't know. There's a large-scale magnetic field change where the satellite is located. We have temporarily lost contact with the satellite. Damn it, fix it for me." The same situation played out at the top levels of various countries around the world. Because Li Anping manipulated the force field at the atomic level to achieve electromagnetic interference, they lost contact with the spy satellites above Kyoto almost at the same time. On Li Anping's side, the core, which was the size of a mountain, was still rising at an increasing speed. It was as if it was going to break through the sky. However, Ash clearly would not allow Li Anping to do so. A loud roar rang out from the depths of the core, and countless tentacles from the ground grabbed out toward the core in the sky. In the distant sky, many huge dragons, flying birds, and all sorts of unbelievable monsters were flying toward the core. Clearly, their goal was to stop Li Anping. Looking at these threats, Li Anping smiled. He raised his hands once again and waved them toward the air above his head. Streams of light flashed above Li Anping's head. In a microscopic world, there were different numbers of electrons around each atom. When electrons were stimulated by photons and jumped from a high energy level to a low energy level, they would radiate out the same light as the photons. This was the principle behind lasers. What Li Anping did was to use the virtual force field as the first force and the photons from the sun as the first stream of light. While vibrating the molecules were stimulated and emitted new photons. The photons would drive the next molecule to emit its energy in the form of a beam wave of the same wavelength. This energy would then act on another similar molecule, causing it to emit energy as well. What followed was a series of triggering effects that were akin to an avalanche, turning the energy of the initial stimulated molecule into a very strong photon. The stronger the initial force, the stronger the laser produced by the vibrating matter. Through this series of avalanche-like reactions, even the smallest amount of energy could produce a laser beam. As for Li Anping's nihility force field, how powerful was he? There was also the mirror he created by controlling the reflection of light in the air. The laser cannon was born from Li Anping's hands just like that. The Heavenly Queen's fifth energy level ability might not be able to produce an explosive increase in strength like Li Anping did. However, Li Anping relied on the terrifying strength of his main body, the terrifying application of the virtual force field, and his brain that could operate like a supercomputer. After obtaining the fifth energy level of the mental force field, as he became more and more proficient in using it, his power became more and more unbelievable. He felt that there was almost nothing he could not do in this state. Li Anping named this state as the state of God, at least for the next 12 hours. I'm invincible. In the next moment, a beam of light that could make the world lose its color lit up in Li Anping's palm. Even the sun in the sky dimmed in comparison. This was because when the light was extremely bright, everything in the surroundings would give off the illusion of darkness. In the next second, the laser shot out from Li Anping's hands. It was as if there was only this beam of light left in the sky. How fast was the speed of light? Those huge dragons, corpse birds, bats, and all kinds of strange monsters flying in the sky did not even have the chance to dodge. They were directly melted and evaporated by the laser beam. The terrifying laser beam was like a sweeper, a sharp sword of light. It circled around Li Anping in a few seconds, sweeping through a radius of several thousand kilometers. All the monsters in the sky were instantly wiped out. Below the mountain of flesh, the psychic energy incarnation used the same method to cut off countless attacking tentacles. At this moment, almost all the humans in the eastern continent could feel that there were two flashes of light in the sky. The entire mountain-like core continued to rise into the sky at a faster and faster speed, and no creature could stop it anymore. Chapter 263. On this day, almost half of the people in the Eastern world saw the second sun in the sky. While the entire mountain of flesh was rising, Li Onping ignited the entire core due to the high temperature of the nuclear fusion. The endless flesh and blood became fuel, turning the mountain of flesh the size of a mountain into a huge fireball. Unknown burning substances constantly fell from the core and fell to the ground, creating a rain of fire in the sky above Danyang. What was even more shocking was that with the rise of this small sun, Danyang seemed to have arrived in the summer July. The burning core emitted endless light and heat, causing the temperature of the entire Danyang to rise continuously. Although all the spy satellites above Danyang lost contact at the same time, they still learned about the second sun in the sky through various methods. Videos of the second sun in the sky were also spreading wildly on the internet. Not only the Eastern continent, but even the Western continent was banned by the higher-ups of various countries, but it still could not stop people from being curious. It was just that this was some kind of special astronomical phenomenon. Ordinary people had no idea how the second sun was born. Although the higher-ups of various countries did not know the principle behind the birth of the second sun in the sky, just knowing that it was Li Onping's doing was enough to make their faces turn ugly. In the outer space above Danyang, more than 600 kilometers above the ground, the pitch-black void became the background of the world. At this time, Li Onping was still standing at the highest point of the mountain of flesh. The difference was that his body was completely surrounded by flames. However, because of the absolute control of the surrounding molecules by the virtual field, his body was not in the high temperature. However, as the core gradually rose until it reached the outer space, the momentum of the flames had gradually decreased due to the gradual disappearance of oxygen. The remaining flesh and blood in the core were used as fuel to burn. However, Ash's core was originally very resistant to fire. During the burning process, it constantly changed its physical structure to resist the high temperature. Now that there was less and less air, it would not take long for the flames to completely stop burning the flesh and blood. Even so, 1/3 of the entire mountain of flesh in the core had been completely burned, and its size had shrunk greatly. It wasn't just the flames. As the psychic energy incarnation continued to accelerate, the entire core rose faster and faster. Especially now that it was in outer space, it had already broken through the second cosmic speed and was increasing towards the third cosmic speed. At this rate, even if Li Onping stopped exerting his power, the entire core would still break free from the gravitational pull of the sun, eventually leaving the solar system and entering outer space. Without the connection of the core, the entire eastern sun stopped shaking. Like a brain-dead vegetable, Gray fell into a deep sleep again. Earthquakes, mountain floods, mudslides, and other natural disasters gradually stopped. Many monsters that had lost control began to act according to their instincts, turning the entire eastern Sun City into a monster paradise. However, Ash's core did not fall into a deep slumber. Just as Li Onping's body was reaching its limit and there was not much soul left for self-healing, the nuclear fusion reaction under the psychic energy incarnation's feet gradually stopped. This was because the speed of the entire core had finally reached the third cosmic speed. It began to break free from the restraint of the sun's gravity and flew into the distant outer space. At this point, Li Onping had completed more than half of his mission. Even if he could not eliminate Gray, the entire human world was safe for the time being. Li Onping breathed a sigh of relief. His entire body was no longer under the pressure of the great force. With the help of his soul power, his body was constantly recovering at a high speed. Suddenly, an endless amount of malice covered his body. Li Onping's expression changed. He exerted force on his feet, and large chunks of flesh suddenly burst open. His entire body left the core at an astonishing speed. With the help of the nihility force field, his entire body made several turns in a row and flew towards the ground. The place where he was originally standing was completely covered by a terrifying tentacle. The entire mountain of flesh at the core was undergoing a series of changes. Thick tentacles stretched out from its body. These tentacles were completely different from the ones Li Onping had encountered on the ground in terms of strength, speed, and material. What was even more frightening was that with the appearance of these tentacles, a gap that was more than 100 kilometers long gradually appeared on the surface of the core. Then, the gap gradually opened, revealing a huge eye. The eye that was more than 100 kilometers long just stared at Li Onping. It contained endless resentment, anger, hatred, and madness. The entire mountain of flesh was now like a huge eyeball floating in the outer space. There was also some kind of terrifying will in its eyes. Just looking at it was enough to drive people crazy. At this moment, Gray had finally completely awakened. A violent consciousness instantly swept across a radius of thousands of kilometers. Then, a voice that sounded like countless insects roaring sounded in Li Onping's mind. The voice sounded illogical and was not systematic at all. It was impossible to tell that it was a language at all. However, Li Onping could understand it. Black, look at you now. You have lost your physical body, lost your power, and are living in the body of a reptile. What a pitiful guy. But don't worry, I will turn you into a part of my body and let you experience the power of our race again. Li Onping could hear and understand the meaning of the other party's words, but he did not know how to speak this language or how to answer. In fact, he was not interested in answering either. Under the acceleration of the virtual field, he kept moving away from Gray's core. It seemed that he did not intend to fight with Gray at all. Are you trying to escape? As the furious consciousness vibrated in the space, huge tentacles grabbed at Li Onping's body, wanting to kill Li Onping as if he was swatting a mosquito. A black shadow flashed, and the psychic energy incarnation appeared behind Li Onping. A dazzling light shone again, and a terrifying laser beam cut the incoming tentacles into two. Roar! Seeing that his attack was ineffective, Gray became even more furious. The tentacles all over his body danced wildly like eyes, constantly twisting his body. On the surface of his core, with waves of tremors, more than 10 huge cannon muzzles that were tens of meters long appeared. It was unknown how Gray did it, but in outer space, countless hydrogen ions from the sun were continuously heated up. In an instant, the temperature exceeded several million degrees and turned into plasma. Then, these ionic hydrogen ions were like huge balls of light, gathered in the cannon muzzles and aimed at Li Onping's body. The plasma itself had a temperature of several million degrees, which was enough to vaporize any substance in an instant. This was a plasma cannon, or rather, a plasma cannon. This was a weapon that had not been researched in the entire world, but Gray had easily completed it with his own body. Li Onping's expression changed when he saw the plasma cannon through the scan of his spiritual energy field. A plasma cannon like this would probably be able to destroy a human city with just one shot. However, Li Onping did not intend to send Gray out of the solar system so easily. He had spent so much effort, and he did not intend to let Gray go so easily. His disgust and hatred for Gray were instinctive, no less than Gray's hatred for him. Li Onping, who felt that the distance between them was about right, smiled coldly and extended his right palm in Gray's direction. The psychic energy incarnation behind him did the same, aiming its palm at Gray. Through the effect of the nihility force field, the surrounding hydrogen ions were constantly spinning and accelerating, producing a large number of positrons. They were like an invisible force that was constantly being produced in front of Li Onping's palm. In front of the psychic energy incarnation's palm, countless positrons were moving at high speed, producing a magnetic field. The electromagnetic force was constantly gathering and restraining the positrons in Li Onping's palm. This was the positron cannon, an ultimate weapon that used the annihilation of positrons and electrons as its principle. Because they were in outer space, the surrounding air was very thin. When the colorless positrons hit the air, they could only produce a weak light. However, in this weak light, Gray already felt a great threat. In the next moment, as more than 10 balls of plasma were shot out from the cannon muzzles on the surface of Gray's body, the positrons in Li Onping's hand turned into a straight line under the effect of the electromagnetic force and shot toward Gray's core. Along the way, the positrons kept hitting the air, forming a dim light beam. Then, in the sky, the light beam collided with the light beam. The terrifying destructive power seemed to make even the heavens and earth tremble. Originally, Li Onping wanted to wait until they were in the vacuum of space before using the positron cannon. This way, he could deal the most damage to Gray. However, time waited for no one, and Gray still woke up at the last moment. Therefore, even if the positron cannon's power could not reach its maximum due to the influence of the air, he could only fire it in advance. In midair, the dim light of the positron cannon quickly annihilated the plasma balls that Gray had shot out. Then, it directly crossed a distance of several kilometers and completely penetrated Gray's core. Wherever the positron cannon passed, all matter dissipated into the air. Gray's core was also constantly decomposing and dissipating. The remnants of his body turned into countless particles and drifted into outer space. Chapter 264. Li Onping's psychic energy avatar slowly disappeared as he fell to the ground faster and faster. However, his eyes were still fixed on Gray's original position. The annihilation reaction between positrons and electrons erupted with a huge amount of energy, causing a huge explosion in outer space that almost lit up the entire sky. In the terrifying explosion, Gray's core had completely disappeared. However, unlike the previous countless killings, Li Onping did not feel the increase of his soul power. Is Gray still alive? Or should I say, do I have to destroy his entire body? Li Onping did not know which of the two possibilities it was. If Gray's core was not completely destroyed, then his remaining fragments would have flown out of the solar system at the speed of the third universe. Li Onping would not be able to see them again in his life. It would be too troublesome to destroy Gray's entire body. After all, Li Onping's body had reached a bottleneck. Even if he absorbed Gray's soul power, he would not be able to effectively improve himself. Besides, Gray's body had completely fallen into a deep sleep after losing its consciousness and had become the original land. Thinking of this, Li Onping's body sped up, leaving a black line behind him as he flew toward Dongyang. After defeating Gray, he still had more than 9 hours left in his divine state. He still had a lot of things to do. In a large supermarket in a city in Dongyang, the supermarket was filled with goods scattered all over the floor, and large pieces of collapsed walls could be seen everywhere. Many wires were exposed outside the walls, bursting with electric sparks from time to time. The lights in the supermarket flickered. A group of people in ragged clothes, with unkempt hair and dirty faces, like refugees, were constantly sweeping canned food, biscuits, and other food into shopping carts. A few of them shouted, "Hurry up! Hurry up! Those monsters are coming! Damn it, it must be the end of the world. We need to grab more food." At this moment, a beastly roar came from the entrance of the supermarket. This group of refugees was shocked and immediately ran toward the back door. Everyone's face was filled with fear. However, before they could run far with their shopping carts, they saw a black shadow flash. A pitch-black cheetah with a cluster of blue flames burning on its head blocked their way. Amidst the screams, the refugees hurriedly turned around and ran. Who would have thought that a similar cheetah would appear behind them? The two cheetahs, one in front and one behind, blocked them in the middle of the shelves, constantly roaring. Just as they were about to be eaten by these monsters, a young man slowly walked out from behind the cheetah and said in a sincere tone, "Don't be afraid. They mean no harm." The man who spoke was Toichi Yoda. He touched the cheetah's head. The cheetah showed an expression of enjoyment and slowly retreated. Seeing the wary expressions on their faces, Toichi Yoda smiled and said, "It is too dangerous to stay in the wilderness. I have found a place that is safer and will not attract powerful monsters. Do you want me to come with you?" Toichi Yoda tried persuading them. As they were hesitating, Toichi Yoda's face sank. He felt an inconceivably powerful mental power sweeping through his body. Before he could say anything, he turned around and quickly ran out of the supermarket. However, just as he moved, a thunderous sound came from the sky outside. Next, the entire supermarket shook and the roof of the supermarket shattered, revealing a large hole with a diameter of 5 to 6 meters. The sunlight shone in through the hole, brightening up the originally flickering supermarket. Lianping slowly flew in through the hole and hovered above Tsuchiyoda. Tsuchiyoda's face turned ashen, and a trace of despair flashed across his eyes. Lianping, are you here to kill me? Beside Tsuchiyoda, two pitch-black cheetahs growled in a low voice. Their pair of eyes glared fiercely at Lianping. That will depend on your choice. Lianping casually glanced at the two cheetahs, a shocking killing intent flashing across his eyes. The two cheetahs instantly became dispirited. They whimpered in a low voice and hid behind Tsuchiyoda with innocent faces. Tsuchiyoda asked, "Why did you find me?" Lianping said coolly, "There is the smell of dust on your body. Additionally, my ears are very sharp. Back when I went to Mount Fuji, I was able to hear a lot of things." Looking at Tsuchiyoda, who had lost all will to resist, Lianping continued, "If you want to live a free life like a human, I can give it to you. However, you have to do me a favor." At this moment, those ordinary people behind Tsuchiyoda were all dumbstruck. They wanted to escape, they wanted to scream. However, the mental energy field had directly rushed into their minds and took over the control of their bodies, causing them to be unable to even move a finger. "What do you want me to do?" Lianping pointed at the two cheetahs behind Tsuchiyoda and asked, "You can control these monsters that have been infected by dust, right?" Tsuchiyoda replied, "Yes." "That's good." Lianping nodded and said, "I want you to restrain all the monsters. They're not allowed to leave Danyang. They have to stay in Danyang forever. Furthermore, I will send people to Danyang in the future. You have to assist them in their work." Tsuchiyoda asked doubtfully, "You want me to be your subordinate? I want you to help me manage Danyang after the cataclysm. As Dust's doppelganger, you can also control these monsters. You are the most suitable candidate." Lianping said, "These monsters and Dust's corpse will be very useful to me in the future. The Xiao will also send a lot of people here. I can't protect them all the time." Tsuchiyoda only thought for a few seconds before he realized that he had no other choice. "I promise you." The next moment, Lianping's figure suddenly shattered, turning into countless fragments that dissipated into the air. Tsuchiyoda's pupils shrank as he thought in surprise. It's actually just a spiritual doppelganger? Also, that spiritual scan just now? When did he obtain spiritual abilities? The original location of Mount Fuji, which was the original location of Mount Fuji before the phase matrix was activated. Inside an ancient shrine, the guards of this place had already died in the cataclysm. The corpses of various monsters and metahumans were everywhere. Clearly, a fierce battle had taken place here before. Lianping blasted the statue in front of him away with a palm strike. A purple demonic longsword was inserted into the stone statue. The doctor stood beside Lianping and said with an embarrassed smile, "The secret of the Tatsuka sword is here. Can I leave now?" He had already come to the sea and was prepared to sneak all the way to the ice fortress. However, he did not expect that Lianping would descend from the sky and block his path. Under the coercion of absolute power, he brought the doctor to a secret base in God's domain. Lianping did not say anything, and the doctor did not dare to leave either. He could only watch as Lianping walked up and pulled out the demonic longsword. Fang Xingzhan looked at the blade and saw that there were countless Danyang characters engraved on it, recording the cultivation method of the Tatsuka sword. Seeing this, Lianping finally nodded in satisfaction. "Are you that afraid of me?" The doctor smiled helplessly. "It's because your power has really frightened me. Staying by your side gives me the feeling as if I'm staying on the surface of the sun." Lianping did not think much of it. He put away the demonic longsword and said casually, "You were my enemy back then. I'm already being merciful by not killing you. How about this? You'll work for me for 50 years. After 50 years, you'll regain your freedom." The doctor smiled bitterly and said, What if I say no? Li Yonping looked at him in surprise and said coldly, I'll kill you, clone you, and make your clone work for me. Cold sweat dripped down from the doctor's forehead. He sighed and said, You're really straightforward. Then my life will be yours for the next 50 years. After getting the cultivation method of the Tatsuka sword, the urgent matters in Danyang were temporarily done. The next step was to wait for the staff of Xia to come to Danyang. They would send people to study the monsters in Gray's body. Both of them were very valuable. The monsters here could also be a good training ground for all kinds of new ability users in the future. Bai Xinghe would come to take over the inheritance of God's domain and Dongyang's government on behalf of Li Yonping. As for the doctor, other than his ability, he was also an excellent talent. Li Yonping planned to let him set up the phase matrix in Tianjing and then send him to work in the 8th Research Institute. After all, the battles that they might encounter in the future would be more and more fierce, and high-level ability users and demons might appear. They all had amazing destructive power. On the other hand, as the capital of the Xia, Tianjing lacked sufficient defensive measures. However, the doctor's phase matrix and Emma's teleportation should be able to make up for this. After these arrangements were completed, Li Yonping would not have to worry about high-level ability users sneaking up on Tianjing when he was not around, or the aftermath of his battle in Tianjing would cause destruction like what happened in Danyang. As for the other miscellaneous things, Li Yonping planned to let his subordinates take care of them. He had to seize the time to go into seclusion and complete the cultivation of the Hell's Map. He had already broken through the limits of his body, so his strength would increase explosively again. The incident with Gray had been a wake-up call for him. He had to seize the time to improve his strength. It took him a lot of effort to deal with Gray, and Gray was not in his best condition. In order to deal with the strong enemies that might appear in the future, he had to improve his strength as soon as possible. However, before he went into seclusion, he still had something to do. Li Yonping focused his attention on the psychic incarnation. A black shadow flashed across the sky like a shooting star. The psychic incarnation was flying at its maximum speed, crossing the 5-star ocean and heading toward the western continent. Chapter 265. On the day of the cataclysm in the eastern sun, the western continent also encounters storm. In just 3 hours, the 16 main strongholds of the League of Stars in the western continent were attacked by unknown people. For the civilians, these were just bombings, arson, murders, and terrorist attacks that were far away from them. But for the leaders of various countries, especially the aptitude users, this series of attacks was no less than a major earthquake. According to eyewitness accounts, the person who attacked the League of Stars was a male aptitude user wrapped in black psychic energy. Strangely, during the attack, this aptitude user did not encounter a single level 5 aptitude user from the League of Stars. The Queen of Heaven also did not appear from beginning to end. Therefore, this attacker did not reveal any strong combat power. His flying speed, however, surprised the various nations. In the face of this attack, the League of Stars was like a tortoise, hiding all of its core forces. It seemed that they had made up their mind not to fight with the other party. Because of this, although they did not suffer any losses, the territories that they had been operating in the western continent for many years were completely swallowed up by various forces. But compared to the cataclysm in the eastern sun, this was just an interlude. In this incident, Li Yonping once again showed enough power to threaten the entire western continent. Whether it was the Amass Federation, the Code State, or Tyrol, they all felt uneasy. Therefore, a large amount of funds were used to research the military, aptitude users, and all kinds of weapons. The Federation also aimed more than 50% of its nuclear warheads at the Xia on the other side of the ocean. The Hand of Death system was fully activated. This meant that if the Federation's president and highest command were to be destroyed by Li Yonping, more than 50,000 nuclear warheads would be launched to all countries around the world, especially 50% of which were aimed at Xia. Other countries with nuclear weapons also had similar nuclear bundling strategies. But now, the target of their defense was no longer the surrounding countries, but the eastern continent, the powerful man who was like a god. However, These old countries were obviously not satisfied with passive defense. With the allocation of funds, all kinds of plans to deal with Li Onping were formulated. A mass federation, Sky City. In a conference room, the famous physicist Jim Parsons looked nervously at the armed soldiers in the corridor. In the wee hours of the morning, the FBI agents came to his house and sent him to the airport. Then, he and dozens of other experts took a military plane and came to the famous Sky Fortress. Along the way, he kept talking to his companions, but he had no idea why the federal military had gathered them here. When he arrived at the meeting room, he was even more shocked. The huge conference room was already filled with hundreds of people. Jim looked carefully and found that there were many familiar faces. They were either physics experts, physiologists, biologists, computer experts, aerospace scientists, and even famous sociologists and psychologists. Jim had no idea at all what they wanted. He could only find a random seat and sit down. While he was sitting down, another group of experts walked in from outside the door. Suddenly, he felt someone pat his shoulder. He turned around and saw a black man looking at him. The man extended his hand to him and said with a smile, "Martin Smith, entomologist." "Hello." Jim shook his hand and said, "Jim Parsons, theoretical physicist." Martin asked curiously, "Jim, do you know why the FBI invited us here?" Jim shook his head. Suddenly, a fat white man sitting in front of them turned around and said, "They are not from the FBI. In fact, after we were sent here, the FBI no longer took over. Did you see their uniforms? Their rank is much higher than the FBI." The fat man saw that the two of them were stunned. He smiled and said, "White Carter, social scientist." The three of them introduced themselves. Then, White said, "I think something big must have happened this time. If it's not an asteroid, it's an alien invasion." Just as the three of them were guessing what was going on, a cough was heard through the microphone. An old woman in a woman's suit was standing on the podium. She looked energetic and was dressed in a woman's suit. His blade-like eyes swept across the entire venue, and everyone instantly quieted down. Judith was silent for a while. Then, she turned on the projector and a huge photo of Li Onping appeared behind her. Seeing the commotion below the stage, Judith said slowly, "All of you here are elites from all walks of life. You are the top talents of the Federation. The reason you are here today is because a world-class crisis has appeared before us. It is a serious threat to the safety of everyone here. It threatens the lives of every Federation citizen on the land under our feet." After a pause, she continued, "Perhaps some of you already know about the existence of ability users. Let me introduce myself. My name is Judith M. I'm the head of the Federation's ability user organization, the Imaginary Agency. And behind me, the man in the photo, you may know him. He's the emperor behind his Xia, Li Onping." Judith's tone changed, and she said coldly, "But there's one thing you may not know. Li Onping is also an ability user, and he may be the most powerful ability user in the world at present. His dangerous thoughts and terrifying strength are a serious threat to the safety of the entire planet." Seeing many experts raise their hands and want to ask questions, Judith ignored them. Instead, she manipulated the touch screen on the podium and began to play the information about Li Onping. Physical strength. Able to withstand machine gun fire within 10 meters. Able to withstand air pressure at 7 times the speed of sound. Speed. Currently, the highest speed shown is 7 times the speed of sound. Strength. Record of lifting mountains of hundreds of millions of tons. Resilience. Once in a nuclear safety center for more than 5 seconds, with large areas of his body burned and even some of his limbs vaporized. But 3 hours later, he appeared 100 kilometers away without any injuries. The information about Li Onping was listed one by one, including his battles from the beginning. They were all placed in front of hundreds of experts. The more they read the information, the more shocked these experts were. If it weren't for the previous FBI report, they would have definitely suspected that this was a joke. After all the information was played, Judith looked at the crowd below the podium and said with a serious face, "It's not only his ability that's dangerous, but also his thoughts. As a dictator, his purpose is to unify the world and bring everyone under his control. And now, he has almost completed the unification of the entire Eastern continent. I think in a few years, he will set his sights on the Federation. So I need your help, whether it's physically, mentally, or Li Anping's psychology, motivation, habits, and abilities. These are all your research goals. Your ultimate goal is only one: to kill Li Anping. The operations department against Li Anping was established on this day. Similar departments were also established in other countries. No one knew when it started, but Li Anping had become the #1 enemy of all Western countries. Somewhere in the Western continent, hundreds of kilometers high in the sky, a 1-kilometer-long thing that looked like a black coffin was floating in the sky. This was the League of Stars Arkansas. At this time, all the superior ability users of the League of Stars gathered in the Arkansas. However, they were all like motionless statues, not moving at all. Even the drifting gas, the leaping water droplets, and the clouds in the sky were all motionless in midair. The clock had also stopped moving, like a painting motionless. This situation lasted for a few seconds before everything returned to normal. The crowd continued to move. All kinds of gas drifted in the ventilation ducts, water droplets fell back into the water, and the clock began to move again. No one in the Ark seemed to have noticed the abnormality just now and continued to do what they were supposed to do. Until half an hour later, everything fell into silence again. In this way, the number of times it stopped moving increased, and the time it stopped moving became longer and longer. It was as if a bizarre world was slowly unfolding in this world. Chapter 266. A month later, in the deepest part of the 8th Research Institute in Tianjin, it was pitch black all around. There was no light source. This was the place that Li Anping had specially asked someone to build. He would cultivate the Hell's Map here with all his might until he succeeded. Ever since Li Anping returned from Danyang, he had asked someone to build this place and moved in. Although the Nyenchi incarnation had caused a ruckus at the League of Stars stronghold in the western mainland, he did not manage to find any higher-ups of the League of Stars. There was also no news about the Heavenly Queen. These people seemed to have received the news in advance and had all gone into hiding. Li Anping originally wanted to get more spiritual gems from her, but he had no other choice. He speculated that after using the spiritual gems and obtaining the Heavenly Queen's level 5 ability, he would also form a connection with her. This allowed the Heavenly Queen to predict his actions in advance and avoid him. In the end, the Nyenchi incarnation could only return. Li Anping did not have the time to play hide-and-seek with the Heavenly Queen. He planned to complete the cultivation of the Hell's Map first and break through the bottleneck of his physical body. He would deal with the spiritual gems later. The secret room he was in now had no light source and was completely soundproof. In order to concentrate, Li Anping eliminated all possibilities that could cause him to have distracting thoughts. In this place, sight and hearing were meaningless. One could not communicate with the outside world at all, other than the clones that were automatically sent in and out by the machine every day. There was nothing else that could disturb Li Anping. If a normal person stayed in this environment, it would be difficult for them to even feel the passage of time. There was no other sound other than their own heartbeat. In a few hours, they would start to fret and go crazy. However, Anping was no longer a normal person. He could endure the pain of having his body crushed and bones crushed. He could complete hundreds of millions of calculations in a second. He could clearly remember everything that had happened since he was a child. Even if he did not eat, drink, see light, or communicate with others, he could still exist like a fossil. Now, he had eliminated all distracting thoughts and wholeheartedly devoted himself to cultivating the Hell's Map. Even the higher-ups of the Xia couldn't contact him. Li Anping had already given a strict order. Unless there was something that even Emma, by Xinghe, Fang Yuhuang, and the Doctor, a total of 4 level 5 ability users, could not solve, no one was allowed to disturb his training. This time, Li Anping only sat cross-legged on the floor. He did not use the operating table, the mechanical arm, the high-frequency knife, or anything like the previous time. Because Li Anping had used more power than he had ever used in his life, Li Onping had a better grasp of his physical body. This was especially true when Li Onping was in the state of God and had the power of mind. Li Onping had scanned his body countless times, allowing him to understand his own body more and more. His control of the blood clone in the Hell map had reached an incredible level. Therefore, the current Li Onping did not need the help of the operating table at all. He could directly interfere with the body and complete the cultivation of the Hell's map. Over the past month, Li Onping had restored the modification of his respiratory system. If there was a microscope in his stomach, it would be discovered that the cells inside were gradually changing. One by one, they were being captured by the psychic energy and completed an incredible evolution. This was the second system that Li Onping had modified, the digestive system. This would completely change his teeth, tongue, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and other parts of his body. The redundant parts would be removed, and the way he absorbed energy would be changed. Now, with the strong control of his body, Li Onping's brain was constantly monitoring the progress of the Hell's map. According to the current speed, the replacement of all the cells in the stomach will be completed in 50 hours. After the modification of the stomach, my digestive ability will increase by about 180 times. Food will also become an important source of energy. The absorption of the body will also be more efficient. The specific values will need to be tested by eating clones. Li Onping was like a supercomputer, working 24 hours a day without sleep or rest. There was no trace of distracting thoughts at all. He put all his thoughts into transforming his body bit by bit. 20 days later, Li Onping, who was in the secret chamber, no longer sat cross-legged. He stood on the ground, lowered his shoulder, and dropped his elbow. Then he punched out a standard straight punch from his waist. It was a light punch, but the wind from the punch still hit the wall, creating a pitter-patter sound that became the only sound in the secret chamber. Bone density needs to be adjusted. The coordination of the impact on the joints has decreased by 7%. About 115,000 punches are needed to complete the modification of the right arm's movement system. After the modification of the right arm's movement system is completed, it can provide an increase of 0.7% in strength. A series of data flashed through Li Onping's mind. Under the skin of his right arm, it was as if there were countless living creatures crawling around. His muscles and bones were all slightly deformed. When all of this stopped, he once again threw out a straight punch. Then, another series of data flashed through his mind. Ever since he had completed the digestive system, Li Onping had chosen to modify the movement system. Among the 6 major systems, this could be the system that provided the greatest improvement to one's physical attributes and battle prowess. It could even help him improve a part of his physical attributes before he completed the cultivation of the Hell's map. Right now, Li Onping had completely entered a state where he had no distractions. His eyes were tightly shut, and there was only darkness in his mind. All sorts of data about his body kept flashing past his mind. As he punched out, he kept on adjusting the bones, muscles, and joints of his right arm. With the help of the Hell's map, these 3 things gradually evolved and changed. They were no longer limited by the bones, muscles, and joints, and had almost become another type of organ. They had more outstanding attributes, such as greater resistance to attacks, endurance, and contraction ability. While Li Onping was cultivating, a production line was running outside the room. Long conveyor belts surrounded the entire room a few times. Many naked human bodies were placed on the conveyor belts. These were all clones created according to Li Onping's request. The moment they came down from the production line, they would be sent to the surroundings of the secret chamber where Li Onping was cultivating. While Li Onping was cultivating, he was also harvesting these clones. These clones were placed on the conveyor belts. After going 1 round around the cultivation chamber, they would be transported to other rooms. Right now, they were already completely dead. Their corpses would be used for a second time to create the next batch of clones. Relying on the astonishing wealth of the 9 royal families, this conveyor belt worked almost 24 hours a day, continuously sending fresh souls into Li Onping's mouth. Right now, Li Onping was like a black hole, snatching away any life that got close to him. He punched out again, and the intense fist wind smashed into the metal wall. A loud boom rang out, and a huge dent was left on the wall. Due to the constant adjustments made by his movement system, Li Onping was unable to control the power of his right fist completely. Hence, situations where he used a little too much force would occur. Muscle strength increased, coordination improved, speed decreased. Through the repeated adjustments, Li Onping kept on correcting the balance between strength and speed. After all, it was very easy to go to the extremes in strength or speed. However, it was also very dangerous, as there would be two obvious weaknesses in battle. This was especially so if one were to increase the burden on one's body and reduce one's speed due to the pursuit of strength. These were all undesirable. Therefore, Li Onping pursued a balance between speed and strength. This was especially so since everyone's body had slight differences. Therefore, he needed to test time after time to make adjustments so that both speed and strength could reach the highest transmission efficiency. Through the repeated adjustments, Li Onping's punches became increasingly smooth. Of course, Li Onping was the clearest about this. It was because he was monitoring every single cell in his body at all times, controlling every single stream of power in his body. 50 days later, the modifications to the movement system have been completed. My physical attributes are now Strength 32, 8, Agility 33, 1, Endurance 33, 7. Although his physical attributes had soared once again, this was only because the body's limits had been increased after the modifications to the movement system. It was not because the limits had been broken. Therefore, Li Onping was not very excited. At this time, he was completely naked, and the muscles on his body were almost invisible. His entire body had a streamlined appearance, like a sculpture that was connected together, giving people an inhuman feeling of coldness. Then Li Onping sat down once again. He did not rest or pause, nor did he skive or get distracted. Like a robot forged from steel, he started the next modification to the system. Chapter 267. A year later, on the streets of Tianjin, Xia Yinyin was walking with a young man. The young man had long platinum hair and wore a black suit. He looked tall and handsome, but there was always a sense of vicissitudes in his eyes. From between his eyebrows, one could vaguely see that he was somewhat similar to Xia Yinyin. Xia Yinyin smiled and said to the young man, "When Yang Guang saw you just now, he thought that I had an elder brother. Yes, the power of life allowed my body to be reborn again and return to its peak state." The young man looked at the various scenes on the street with a surprised expression. "Tell me in detail what happened in the past 1.5 years when I was asleep." The young man with the vicissitudes of life in his eyes was Xia Laikong, who had finally awakened after a year and a half of sleep. At this time, he looked like a young man in his 20s. One could not tell his original age at all, and there was not a trace of old age that he showed when he was asleep. This was because his dragon form reincarnation contained the power of wind, rain, thunder, lightning, life, death, illusion, and destruction. The power of life among them allowed him to heal his injuries through sleep, allowing his body to return to its peak state. Xia Yinyin said with a smile, "That's a long story." Xia Yinyin then slowly told Xia Laikong about the series of events that happened after Xia Laikong fell into a coma. While listening, the surprise in Xia Laikong's eyes became more and more intense. Half an hour later, the two of them walked and stopped and came to a pedestrian street in the city center. Looking at the lively scene in front of him, Xia Laikong murmured, "So, Li Onping has been in seclusion for more than a year?" "Yes." Xia Yinyin nodded and sighed. "Big brother, Li has not appeared for more than a year. It is said that after he returned from Donyang, he entered the 8th Research Institute and cultivated desperately every day. His goal is to break through to the 5th energy level." Xia Laikong frowned and said, "If it's like what you said before, Li Onping is now the real leader of the Xia. Then is it okay for him to not appear for a year?" Xia Yinyin shook her head. Just as she was thinking about how to explain to Xia Laikong, a series of girls' screams suddenly erupted in front of them. Xia Laikong's expression changed. A whirlwind rolled under his feet, and his whole body flew into the air, leaving behind afterimages. While sprinting, he wanted to set up an illusion so that the people around him could not see him, so as not to startle the world. However, he found that although there were citizens on the street pointing at him, and some of them even took out their cameras to take pictures, none of them showed any surprise. It was as if it was normal for a person to fly in the sky. Just as he was feeling strange, a black shadow flashed in front of him. Two men in blue and white uniforms suddenly appeared in front of him and stopped him. Xiao Laikong was shocked. What fast speed? No, there is no shadow at all. Is it teleportation? Just as Xiao Laikong was thinking about this, the two men in uniform spoke. Friend, are you okay? Flying is not allowed in Tianjing's 4th Ring Road. Please descend first. Xiao Laikong frowned. Are you people from the Xia Dragonfinch? I just heard a woman screaming. One of them waved his hand and said with a smile, it's because of a new issue of Soul Battle at the newspaper stand over there. The cover of this issue seems to be Lord Jingguang. It's his fans who are screaming. Just as he was explaining, his companion beside him suddenly frowned. That's not right. I didn't find his information in the ability library. You didn't register? When he said this, the two of them became alert at the same time. Their psychic energy surged, and they stared at Xia Laikong from both sides. Who are you? Why didn't you register? Xiao Laikong shook his head. I don't know what you're talking about, but I definitely don't mean any harm. Just as the three of them were about to draw their swords, Xiao Yinyun finally ran over angrily. She shouted at their feet, wait, don't fight. It's all a misunderstanding. After a series of explanations, the two members of the Great Xia Dragonfinch nodded at Xiao Laikong and said, so, it's a newly awakened ability. Then go and register as soon as possible. Otherwise, if you're discovered, you'll be arrested as an illegal resident. The other person said, I'm sorry, there have been a lot of foreign spies recently. Although you have the certificate issued by the higher-ups, we still have to go through the formalities. As he spoke, he put a white bracelet on Xiao Yekong's wrist and explained, this is a tracking device. Don't try to remove it, or it'll be very dangerous. After you register your ability, the people at the registration office will help you remove it. Xiao Laikong looked at the bracelet on his wrist curiously. Xia Yinyun nodded to show her understanding. She knew that no one in the government could go against the rules. Even if she used her and Xiao Yekong's identities, it would be meaningless. This was because the entire government system was under the surveillance of the intelligence system managed by Momo and Li Qian. If the two people in front of her were suspected of violating the rules, they would be immediately arrested and put on trial. The current de Xia was no longer the same as before. Now, it was like the most sophisticated instrument. Every gear was operating efficiently according to a prescribed route. Any parts that were in the way would be dismantled at the fastest speed, destroyed, and replaced with the next one. Because of this, there was a shortage of government workers in many parts of the country. With such a high degree of surveillance and pressure, many young people in the government sector chose to resign and look for other jobs. Even though Li Anping hadn't shown up for more than a year, no one dared to go against the policies he had set. He was like a sacred sword, hanging over the heads of everyone in Xia. Seeing the two people disappear in an instant, Xiao Laikong blinked and said, teleportation? This ability is very strong. What are their names? Xia Yinyun smiled and said, how would I know what their names are? And that's not teleportation. It's a phase matrix. Xiao Laikong chewed on these words and continued to listen to Xia Yinyun's explanation. Anyway, I don't know the specific principles. It's all done by the Dr. Emma and Dr. Xiao Lu from the 8th Research Institute. It allows authorized people to perform similar long-distance teleportation in the entire Tianjing area. Xiao Laikong nodded as if he understood. He looked at the passers-by around him, but found that they had already gone about their own business. The expressions on their faces were completely accustomed to it. Xiao Laikong sighed and said, it seems that everyone has really gotten used to the existence of ability users. If it was in the past, I would have been surrounded. Xia Yinyun smiled and said, it's not like this everywhere. Ability users will still attract attention in many other places. It's just that here in Tianjing is the headquarters of the Xia Dragonfinch. The work of recruiting ability users is carried out here. It's a place where many ability users gather. The density of ability users is the highest in the world. The citizens here are more experienced and knowledgeable. Xiao Laikong asked again, "Speaking of which, do all ability users need to register now?" "Yes." Xiao Yunyan nodded and said, "Yang Guang has already arranged it for us. It's just to register the type of ability, its function, and its level. Next, different abilities will have different arrangements. But unless it's a very dangerous ability, it generally won't have any impact on our lives after registration." Xiao Laikong nodded thoughtfully. At this time, a series of girls' screams entered his ears, but this time he didn't fly up and rush over. Instead, he walked slowly towards the place where the screams came from with Xia Yunyan. He remembered what the two ability users said just now and asked Xia Yunyan, "What soul battle? Do you know?" "Oh, soul battle. Speaking of which, the new issue seems to be released today." Xia Yunyan explained to Xiao Laikong. "It's a magazine about ability users. The main focus is on ability users' combat, strength, and some gossip." From Xia Yunyan's introduction, Xiao Laikong learned that Soul Battle was a magazine that specialized in talking about superpowers. It was similar to the martial arts magazines in the past, such as Black Belt and Fight, but the content changed from martial arts and martial artists to abilities and ability users. As the two of them were talking, a newsstand appeared in their line of sight. From time to time, a few women would pass by the newsstand and pick up a magazine. Screams, exclamations, and exclamations were coming from their mouths. Seeing Xiao Yekong's puzzled look, Xia Yunyan pulled him over and bought a copy of Soul Battle for him to see. On the cover of the magazine, the huge word Soul Battle looked vigorous and powerful, followed by a row of small titles. The top 10 most dangerous abilities in history. Nanjiang, the Avengers attack again. The strongest level 4 ability user. Jing Guang tells you secrets you don't know. On the cover of the magazine was a young man with golden hair. He was standing in the air with his arms crossed. He was wearing the Xia Dragonfinch's blue and white uniform, and his whole person was as cold as an iceberg. Xiao Laikong pointed at Jing Guang on the cover and said, "He's an ability user?" Xia Yunyan nodded. "Yes, he's called Jing Guang. He joined the Xia Dragonfinch after Grandpa went into hibernation. He's very powerful. I heard from Lu Sheng that after he reached level 4, he already has the destructive power of a level 5 ability user. Because Brother Li went into hibernation, the higher-ups decided to use him as one of the promotion points for ability users." Speaking up to this point, Xia Yunyan smiled. His exposure rate has been very high recently, and he's very popular in Xia. I heard that a group of female fans jointly requested for him to release a photo album. Just as the two of them were talking, another 2 little girls carrying school bags and wearing school uniforms came to the school bag stall, and each of them bought a copy of Soul Battle. Originally, this Soul Battle magazine was completely male-oriented, but because the cover of this issue was Jing Guang and there was a rare exclusive interview inside, many fans came forward to buy the magazine. There were even fan groups that pooled their money to buy the magazine, and the sales of the magazine increased. Xiao Laikong naturally couldn't understand this kind of thing. He only said with a bit of worry, "The abilities of ability users are all secrets, right? Is it good to expose it to the magazine like this?" Xia Yunyan explained, "These are like military magazines, and they don't involve any secrets. However, recently, fewer and fewer people are buying paper magazines. For example, a new magazine like Soul Battle went electronic when the first issue was released. Unless it's a fan, most people directly go to the magazine's website to see the latest ability user news." Xiao Laikong sighed with emotion as he looked at the bustling crowd on the street. The Xia, there really were too many changes. Chapter 268. Danyang City, West 143rd District. There was a dense forest everywhere. There were huge plants and trees that were hundreds of meters tall. It was completely different from any other place in Danyang City. It looked like a primeval forest. Moreover, this primeval forest was not alone. All kinds of roars came from the depths of the forest. It was hard to imagine what kind of monster could make such a terrifying roar. However, in this forest that was definitely not suitable for humans to live in, there was a small group of people moving slowly on the ground. There were more than 10 people in this small group. Each of them was carrying a huge backpack, and they were also equipped with guns and knives. They looked like an expedition team, but they also looked like an army. In the middle of the group was the pink-haired holy princess of Ice Fortress, Claudia. At this time, she was wearing a dark green combat uniform. The tight combat uniform accentuated her slender and beautiful curves. Her hair was tied into a ponytail, and coupled with the huge backpack and the silver-white pistol on her waist, she gave off a capable and valiant feeling. The group carefully moved forward in the forest. The hot weather made Claudia wipe the sweat on her forehead. She exhaled and finally couldn't help but ask the young man beside her, "How long will it take for us to reach West 69th District?" The young man looked young and was wearing the same standard equipment as Claudia. However, he was one of the few people in the group who didn't carry a gun. What was even more special was that there was a furry little animal on his shoulder. It looked a little like a squirrel and a little like a ferret, but it had a body of golden fur. Hearing Claudia's question, the young man shrugged and said, "West 69th District is one of the most dangerous areas in the West region. In order to reach it safely, we have to take a long detour. It will take about 10 days. 10 days? Claudia frowned and asked, "Is there no way to go faster? Our speed is too slow. If it's because of me, I have undergone rigorous physical training. There's no need to slow down like this." The young man smiled and shook his head. "It's not because of you. If we go too fast, it'll be easy to attract attention. So far, more than 13,000 species of animals and plants have been discovered in New Danyang, and this number was still increasing every day. What they all had in common was that each of them could kill people. I've been here since the closed beta. If you want a whole team to reach West 69th District safely, you'll have to listen to me." Claudia nodded and didn't say anything. As the heir to the throne who had received an elite education from a young age, she naturally understood that she should listen to the experts on such matters. However, she really could not wait any longer. She had already discussed the marriage with Li Onping, but who knew that as soon as Li Onping returned from Danyang, he immediately went into seclusion. Not to mention the marriage, even Xia's imperial selection was indefinitely delayed. Claudia had no choice but to wait in Tianjing. Who knew that she would have to wait for more than a year? While she was waiting, the internal struggle in the ice fortress became more and more intense. Claudia's father, Ivan II, was completely at a disadvantage. Although the other three aristocratic families were afraid of Li Onping's power and did not dare to do any substantial harm to Claudia's family members, the struggle for power and profit was inevitable. And Claudia had not made any progress in Tianjing for more than a year, which made the other three aristocratic families even more ambitious. In the past 6 months, they had sent their outstanding women to Tianjing to study. Their purpose was self-evident. It was Li Onping. Originally, Claudia still had a glimmer of hope that Li Onping had confirmed with her before. Who knew that when Li Onping finally came out of seclusion half a month ago, he did not mention the marriage at all and directly came to New Danyang. Under the pressure of the three aristocratic families in the country, Claudia made a decision. She brought her family knights and hired some people familiar with New Danyang to be tour guides and take her to find Li Onping. To put it simply, she was here to force a marriage. The young man named Therese next to her was a professional explorer of New Danyang. Since New Danyang opened its closed beta half a year ago, he was among the first batch of people to take the initiative to sign up. He once traveled the entire Western District alone and discovered more than 1,700 new species. Just as the group was slowly walking through the dense primitive forest, a cry of surprise suddenly rang out from the front of the group. Terith hurriedly walked up and saw that dozens of butterflies had appeared in front of the group. These butterflies were shining with a faint blue light, looking dreamy and illusory. The entire group was mesmerized as they looked at the butterflies fluttering in the air with admiration. Even Claudia showed a loving expression and wondered if she should take a few back as pets. It was rare to see such beautiful animals. However, Therese's face changed drastically and he shouted, "Come back." But it was too late. At the front of the group, a big man stretched out his finger and a blue butterfly stopped on his index finger. When he heard Therese shout, he looked back with a puzzled expression. Damn it! Therese's face sank. With a move of his hands, a pitch-black spear appeared in his hand. Then, he threw it with one hand. The spear crossed a distance of dozens of meters in an instant and pierced through the big man's chest with terrifying force. Then, without slowing down, the spear flew backward with the big man in tow. Seeing that the big man was nailed to a tree by Therese's spear, the surrounding people immediately pulled out their guns and aimed at Therese in the middle of the group. Their faces were full of anger. Claudia also pulled out a silver pistol and pointed it at Therese's temple. She asked coldly, "What are you doing?" "Kill him. He killed my brother." Therese did not speak. He just raised his hands high above his head to show that he had no malicious intentions. He pointed at the dead big man with his chin. Just as everyone glanced at the big man's corpse, a blue flame had enveloped the big man's body. A few seconds later, there was a loud bang. In a huge explosion, the big man's body had turned into powder. The blue flame enveloped a range of more than 10 meters around the big man, and then gradually disappeared. Looking at this scene, most of the people felt a lingering fear. They could not help but swallow their saliva, thinking about what would have happened if the big man had not been shot out. Claudia's face was even paler. If the big man had exploded in the group, just now more than 1/3 of the people would have been injured. Even she would have been in danger. Therese looked at everyone's ugly faces and calmly said, "This is the hell butterfly, number 227. When they were first discovered, we lost 6 aptitude users. Every one of them was an expert in their own right. This kind of hell butterfly will take the initiative to pounce on its prey, ignite the flesh with a blue flame, and then detonate. After being ignited by this blue flame, the flame will not go out unless the flesh is completely burned. Any attack will also cause the hell butterfly to detonate." After a pause, Therese said again with a serious face, "Since the opening of New Danyang, more than 500 aptitude users have died. None of them are weaker than you. Let me remind you again, if you want to reach Area 69 safely, don't touch anything, don't eat anything, and don't do anything unnecessary. In that case, you have about a 30% chance of surviving to the end." Therese's words made the people in the group feel heavy again. Only then did they remember the horror of New Danyang in the government's propaganda. New Danyang was the new name of Danyang after the cataclysm. No one knew the cause of the cataclysm. They only knew that since then, the entire environment of Danyang had undergone a drastic change. All kinds of unprecedented plants and animals appeared on this continent. Half a year ago, the Xia government announced the situation of New Danyang and took the initiative to invite a group of volunteers to explore New Danyang. However, in the end, less than 1 in 10 people returned alive. Even so, the strange plants and animals they brought back still caused a huge reaction in society. There were rats that could generate electricity, herds that could make people grow taller, and dragons that could fly and breathe fire. Most of these precious species were purchased by the Xia government, and the remaining few were bought by some private consortiums. Everyone who came back alive from New Danyang became rich overnight and no longer had to worry about food and clothing. For a time, the entire New Danyang became synonymous with wealth and opportunity. It attracted the attention of countless aptitude users, mercenaries, retired soldiers, and adventurers. However, the entire New Danyang was under the management of the Xia government. Regardless of whether one entered or left, they had to be approved by the Xia government. Any harvest in New Danyang would also be inspected by the Xia government. Even so, many people still came here and regarded New Danyang as an adventure paradise. Chapter 269. Currently, New Danyang was divided into 4 districts: East, West, South, and North. Other than the North District, which was mainly occupied by the remaining Japanese, the other three districts were occupied by countless monsters. In the blink of an eye, 9 days had passed, and Claudia's group was getting closer and closer to District 69. At this time, the number of people in the team was 5 less than before. And among the remaining people, almost all of them looked exhausted, their bodies covered in dust, and they didn't look much better than refugees. In the middle of the team, Claudia also looked haggard. Her lips were cracked, and her hair was covered in the smell of dirt. She never thought that there would be such a dangerous place in the world. It should be known that half of their team were aptitude users. The leader, Therese, was a level 4 aptitude user with many years of adventure experience. But even so, they still lost 6 people along the way, and their mental and physical strength were almost at their limits. Along the way, Claudia and the others encountered invisible cheetahs, mantises bigger than humans, monsters that could spit lava, and forests that were hundreds of square meters in size that could be moved and hunted. All kinds of monsters made the team members physically and mentally exhausted. Only Therese was still full of energy, and every day looked like the first day of their departure. At this time, the team had reached District 68. In front of them was an endless expanse of scorched earth. There were no trees, no flowers, and no signs of life. It was like a desert of life, and there were no signs of life. In the distance of the scorched earth, there was a volcano that kept emitting thick smoke, and sporadic magma would erupt from time to time. Waves of tremors came from the earth, making people wonder if the volcano would erupt in the next moment. One of the team members said, "There are no more monsters here, right?" Another person said, "Is it okay if we go this way? That volcano looks like it's going to erupt at any time." Therese smiled and didn't say anything, but Claudia had already seen his ability in the past few days. Seeing Therese's expression, she couldn't help but ask, "What? Are they wrong?" Therese shook his head. "Do you know? In the natural world, powerful creatures all have their own territories. In their territories, other species are very rare." A big man heard Therese's words and asked, "You're saying that the place we're in now is the territory of a powerful creature?" Therese nodded and replied, "The entire Western District 68 belongs to the tri-headed golden dragon. This monster was over 100 meters long and weighed tens of thousands of tons. It had the ability to manipulate gravity. When he was first discovered, hundreds of soldiers were sacrificed. When a young man heard Therese's introduction, he immediately became afraid. Then why are we still walking this way? If we're discovered by this monster, won't we be doomed?" The others also looked at Therese in confusion. After only a few days of interaction, they already understood Therese's ability. He was definitely not a brainless person who would seek death, so they were all waiting for his explanation. Therese didn't disappoint them and explained, "Although the tri-headed golden dragon is very powerful, it's already very gentle compared to other monsters. That's because it spends most of its time sleeping in the volcano." He pointed at the volcano in the distance that was constantly emitting thick smoke and said, "This monster usually absorbs the volcano's energy, so although this volcano looks very active, it actually won't erupt. As long as we go quietly and don't wake it up, this route will be very safe." Then, the group ran in the direction of the volcano. According to Therese, as long as they climbed over the volcano, they would reach their destination, Western District 69. However, along the way, everyone behaved cautiously under Therese's reminder. They didn't dare to make any loud noises. If they had anything to say, they would lower their voices for fear of waking up the tri-headed golden dragon in the volcano. 2 hours later, they had climbed halfway up the volcano. The surrounding temperature was getting higher and higher, and the air was filled with the smell of sulfur. However, no one complained at this time. After 9 days of travel, everyone in the team understood that New Donyang was definitely not a good place for a vacation. Any carelessness or mistake could cost them their lives. At this moment, the little ferret-like thing on Therese's shoulder suddenly squeaked a few times. Therese looked in the direction of the little thing and saw a strange flower blooming at the bottom of a cliff. "Wait for me." As he said that, he put down his backpack took out his tools and ran in the direction of the flower. The people in the team were already used to it. The little thing on Tereth's shoulder was also a species discovered in New Danyang. It was called the gold mouse. It had a strong sense of smell and vision and could always find some more valuable animals and plants. It was because of this gold mouse that Tereth could find many particularly valuable things and avoid fatal crises time and time again. In fact, many powerful aptitude users would find ways to subdue one or two useful creatures to help them when exploring New Danyang. Because the Xia government didn't allow creatures that were too dangerous to leave New Danyang, they often chose creatures like the gold mouse that weren't strong in combat, but had special abilities. When everyone watched Tereth carefully dig out the flower on the cliff and put it into a leather bag on his belt, they couldn't help but feel envious. It was a bag made from the skin of a creature called the void dragon. The void dragon's body was very weak, about the size of an ordinary person's arm. However, it had a strange spatial bag ability. When it encountered danger, it could hide in the spatial bag, and the bag made of its skin had a chance to become a space bag. It was said that there were only 100 similar bags produced so far, and 80% of them had been taken away by the Xia government. Because this space bag had attracted the great interest of a director in the 8th Research Institute, he was trying to fully decipher its principles. After putting the flower into the space bag, Tereth showed a satisfied smile on his face. His space bag was not big. It was used to store all the things that were not easy to store or were particularly precious, so he still had to carry a backpack. Okay, let's go. After Tereth said this, the group set off again and walked toward the top of the volcano. But after walking for more than 10 minutes, a loud beast roar suddenly came from the sky. Accompanied by this beast roar, the entire volcanic area seemed to be lively. Many strange-looking insects crawled out from under the rocks and ran in all directions as if it was the end of the world. Just when everyone was panicking, a second beast roar came from the sky, accompanied by a series of sonic booms. A palpitating feeling pressed on everyone's hearts. It was the most primitive fear of humans, like a frog encountering a snake or a sheep encountering a wolf. Everyone's eyes were filled with fear. A few people's legs even went weak, and they almost fell to the ground. Damn it, it's the draconic aura. Tereth looked at the sky and saw a black shadow in the air above the volcano in the blink of an eye. It had pitch-black scales, thick limbs, and wings more than 200 meters wide. Flying in the sky was a black dragon that only existed in myths and legends. Everyone present looked at the black dragon hovering in the sky with an ugly expression. Angry dragon roars came from the black dragon's mouth. Even the dumbest person could tell that he was provoking him. Tereth's face was ashen. He said in disbelief, "What's going on? Why is the black dragon here? Why is it provoking the tri-headed golden dragon?" However, in the eyes of these behemoths, Tereth's group had no place. As the black dragon roared again and again, the whole volcano began to shake violently. A golden dragon head emerged from the volcano's crater. There were still drops of lava on the dragon's head. They dripped from the dragon's mouth onto the volcanic rocks, making a series of sizzling sounds. Then, the golden dragon head pointed at the sky and let out a terrifying roar. Sound waves visible to the naked eye spread in all directions. The whole volcano trembled violently, and large pieces of flesh fell down. In the group, more than half of the people were swayed by the roar. The terrifying sound waves even made their ears ring, and they couldn't hear anything. Therese's face darkened. He grabbed Claudia and shouted, "Let's go! Go! They're fighting for territory. Go before they start fighting." A few of the stronger ability users followed behind Tereth, while some of the weaker ability users also stood up shakily. As Tereth ran, he turned his head with an ugly expression. He saw that the 3 golden dragon heads had all emerged from the volcano's crater. Accompanied by terrifying roars, countless rocks began to shatter. The black dragon in the sky somersaulted and fell toward the crater. It's the gravity field, the ability of the tri-headed golden dragon. Damn it, Seeing this, Terith knew that the tri-headed golden dragon had used its ability to increase the gravity field around him. This move had once crushed a special force team into meat paste in an instant. Now, he turned his head and saw that the place where they were originally standing had been crushed to the ground. They were slowly being squeezed out of shape. At the crater, following the black dragon's collision, the two behemoths tumbled toward the depths of the volcano. Terith could only hear the angry roars of the behemoths. He could feel the ground beneath his feet shaking. Just this alone was enough for him to feel how intense the battle between the two terrifying beasts was. If it were on the eastern mainland, the battle between the two would probably destroy a city. At this moment, he could not help but admire the method used by the higher-ups of the Xia to restrain all these dangerous monsters on East Sun Island. Then, Terith thought, but what's going on? Why did the black dragon come back to provoke us? Is it to fight for territory? But I remember that the black dragon has its own territory. Terith thought as he led the rest of the team down the mountain. Behind him, everyone, including Claudia, was pale. Their eyes were filled with fear. At this moment, no one was thinking about District 69. Getting away from the two beasts was the highest priority. Fortunately, the two beasts only had eyes for each other. They did not have the time to care about Terith and the rest. Therefore, half an hour later, the group finally escaped safely to the foot of the volcano. They all looked in the direction of the crater with lingering fear. The roars of the beasts could still be heard. Just as the group began to think about what to do next, another wave rose. The sound came from the sky again. This time, it was not the dragon's roar from before. Instead, it was thunderous. A burly man looked at the sky in confusion and muttered, "Thunder? Is it going to rain?" However, as the thunder rumbled, something happened that left everyone dumbfounded. The black dragon and the tri-headed golden dragon crawled out of the crater at the same time. They looked like a pair of adulterers who had been caught red-handed in bed. Even Terith and the rest could see the panic in their movements. They watched as the two beasts climbed out of the crater. They did not dare to roar or fight. Instead, they flew off in opposite directions like stray dogs. Terith said in surprise, Are they running away?" Chapter 270. The black dragon flapped its 200-meter-wide wings, creating a hurricane and creating an explosive sound in the air. The black dragon's body was already 200 meters away. After flapping a few more times, it was already more than a kilometer away. Compared to the speedy black dragon, the tri-headed golden dragon was much slower. Its body was much more bloated than the black dragon's, and its body structure was not as suitable for flight as the black dragon's. Even after flapping its wings with all its might, it could only fly 200 meters away. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact that it could control gravity, it might not even be able to fly. At that moment, a black shadow suddenly appeared behind the tri-headed golden dragon's tail. It was so fast that no one could see how it appeared. Terith squinted his eyes. He could only vaguely see that it was a man. Compared to the man, the tri-headed golden dragon was like a skyscraper. It was like comparing an ant to an elephant. However, when it saw the man appear behind it, the tri-headed golden dragon cried out in pain. It flapped its wings and tried to fly forward with all its might. It looked like a young girl who was being molested. However, what happened next shocked Terith even more. The man in the air stretched out his hand and grabbed the tail of the tri-headed golden dragon. It was unknown how he managed to grab the tail of the tri-headed golden dragon, but the tri-headed golden dragon could no longer fly away. It was like a sparrow that had its leg caught. No matter how hard it tried, it couldn't fly out of the man's palm. Terith shook his head. How could the tri-headed golden dragon be a sparrow? However, the man immediately let Terith know that the tri-headed golden dragon was no different from a sparrow in his hands. The man grabbed the tri-headed golden dragon's arm and flung it. The terrifying strength straightened the tri-headed golden dragon's tail and dragged its body to the ground. The tri-headed golden dragon's huge body pushed the surrounding air away at an astonishing speed. It was 150 meters tall, 100 meters long, and weighed tens of thousands of tons. Yet, the man threw it to the ground with just one hand. With a loud bang, a series of crisp sounds came from the tri-headed golden dragon's body. A huge crater was formed in the ground. With the three-headed dragon and the ground as the center, a ripple visible to the naked eye rose up from the ground. The ground was like a wave that radiated out for nearly 100 meters. First, the head of the three-headed dragon crashed into the ground, followed by its body, wings, and lower limbs. Under the tremendous force that could move mountains, all of its body parts were continuously pressed against the ground, as if trying to squeeze all of the flesh on the three-headed dragon's body to its brain. The ferocious three-headed dragon was now like a broken toy. It kept making pitiful whimpering sounds, as if it was begging for mercy. Everyone, including Therese, stared at the scene in front of them with their eyes wide open. A person had actually grabbed the skyscraper-sized tri-headed golden dragon with one hand and flung it to the ground like a toy. Anyone who saw this scene would be so shocked that their jaws would drop. Claudia was the only one who reacted. She screamed in the direction of the figure, Li Onping. That's right, the person who was fiddling with the tri-headed golden dragon like a toy was Li Onping. He glanced at Claudia and the others but did not say anything. That was because he still had things to do. Black Dragon turned around to look at the fate of the tri-headed golden dragon and flew even faster. In the blink of an eye, it was already more than 2 kilometers away from Li Onping. Seeing this, Li Onping only sneered. Then, he took a step forward and disappeared without a trace. Only the place where he was originally standing in the air was still surging with white airwaves. Moreover, as Li Onping took a step forward, a terrifying explosion sounded in front of everyone's eyes. The sound waves that could be seen with the naked eye swept through everyone's body. Those with weaker physiques directly fell to the ground. Even the few who were left swayed and felt a constant buzzing sound in their ears. As his strength continued to increase, the gap between Li Onping and humans was getting bigger and bigger. Even ability users could only keep up with his pace if they were at energy rank 5 or above. Not only had his body broken through the limit, but his physique had also reached strength 37, 8, agility 38, 2, and stamina 38, 7. All of them had increased by 4 to 5 points. This caused him to be unable to get used to his newly increased strength. Sometimes, just by moving faster, the sonic boom would directly cause ordinary people to faint. Just like now, Black Dragon, who was far away, trembled in fear when he heard the thunderous sonic boom. This was not the first time he heard this sound. Every time he heard this sound, it meant that he was about to be beaten up. It was also because of this that he escaped from his nest and wanted to change his location. However, he did not expect that before he could take back the territory from the tri-headed golden dragon, that monstrous human would come again. By the time Black Dragon heard the sound, it was already too late. Just like before, Li Onping directly grabbed Black Dragon's tail. The terrifying inertia and Li Onping's immense strength straightened Black Dragon's body in midair. Then, with a swing of his arm, Black Dragon's body carried an unstoppable force as it slammed into the tri-headed golden dragon. Rumble. Like a black meteor, Black Dragon's body was smashed into the ground from 2 kilometers away. Amidst the tremors, the ground cracked open, and a large pile of rolling rocks fell from the volcano. The dust on the ground soared into the sky, covering half of the sky. Claudia and the others were all shaken to the ground. Their limbs were numb, and they were like frightened animals. They could not stand up for a while. Fortunately, this place was spacious, and they were not injured. If that attack had happened in a city, it would have probably destroyed half of the city. This was also one of the reasons why Li Onping came to New Danyang. This place was sparsely populated, and there were powerful monsters everywhere. The entire ground was supported by gray bodies, and it was abnormally sturdy. It allowed Li Onping to unleash his full strength. It was not like staying in Tianjing, where his hands were tied, and he was afraid that he would destroy half of the city. Speaking of which, Li Onping had not slept for more than a year. Sometimes, he would think that if he fell asleep and had a nightmare, Would he wake up the next day to see the whole of Tianjing in ruins? Would the Xia dragonfinch be wiped out overnight? Fortunately, with his current level of energy and his modified body, he did not need to sleep at all. Even if he was tired, he only needed to expend some soul power. He had been continuously harvesting clones for a year. Now, he had more than 10 million units of soul power, so he did not care about the sporadic consumption. Li Onping, who was now standing in midair, was wearing a white robe. If one looked closely, they would see that the surface of the robe seemed to be constantly swirling with air. In fact, this was indeed the case. The clothes in the human world could not meet Li Onping's requirements. They would completely fall apart if he moved them. Therefore, Li Onping now basically maintained the state of atmospheric armor at all times, turning it into clothes to wear on his body. On Li Onping's waist, there was a long sword without a sheath. The whole sword was shining with a faint purple light, and the blade was densely covered in black Donyang ancient text. The whole katana gave people a feeling of infinite strangeness. This katana was the most powerful weapon that had been passed down in the divine realm for more than 2,000 years. 4 generations, only the leader of the divine realm could control it, the Tatsuka sword. On the blade of the Tatsuka sword, there was also the secret martial art of the Tatsuka sword. One of them was a weapon, and the other was a secret martial art. However, they were both called the Tatsuka sword because the two were originally one. About 2 months ago, after Li Onping finished cultivating the Hell's Map, he began to work on the secret martial arts. The first one to bear the brunt was the Tatsuka sword. If he used it well, it could greatly increase his combat power. After some research, he roughly understood some of the mysteries of the Tatsuka sword in his hand. The demon sword in his hand was not a knife made of some kind of metal, but a weapon completely made of psychic qi. It condensed the psychic qi left behind by the leaders of the divine realm. After more than 2,000 years of accumulation, the psychic qi contained in it was almost endless. Not only was it almost condensed into a solid state, but it also made the entire sword solid, breaking the limit that ordinary people could not see psychic qi. The second reason he came to Danyang this time was the Tatsuka sword. Chapter 271. Every time the sword of Tatsuka broke through a level, it would gain a new ability to absorb. For example, a level 5 aptitude user could use the sword of Tatsuka to absorb 5 types of abilities. As long as they held the sword of Tatsuka, they would be able to use the ability to absorb. However, although the original sword of Tatsuka was powerful, it had absorbed the qi of past elites, making it difficult for ordinary people to use. This was because qi was the integration of the body and mind. The sword of Tatsuka that had absorbed so much qi also contained the will of various people, as well as all kinds of positive and negative emotions. Ordinary people could withstand it if they only held the sword, but once they used the sword of Tatsuka, they would be eroded by the qi. Their personality would change, or they would go crazy. Therefore, the leaders of the divine realm had a way to replace it. They created replicas of the sword of Tatsuka and used them to absorb and use the abilities. Unfortunately, the replicas were much weaker than the real sword of Tatsuka, and each sword could only absorb one type of ability. However, Li Onping did not have such concerns. Mental attacks had no effect on him at all. With the sword of Tatsuka in his hand, he would not be affected at all. He could use the demonic sword in his hand without any worries. At this time, Li Onping had reached the 5th level through the Hell's Map. Just like the other 5th level elites, his body had become inhuman. After completing the transformation of all 6 major systems, Li Onping's body now had unlimited possibilities for growth. There were no bottlenecks or obstacles. As long as he kept training and devouring elites, his body would grow without limit. One day, not to mention the entire planet, perhaps even the entire universe would not be able to stop him. Therefore, Li Onping could use the sword of Tatsuka to absorb 5 types of abilities. This time, He came to New Danyang to find some monsters with powerful abilities and absorb their abilities. Originally, Li Onping could directly find an aptitude user to absorb, but the sword of Tatsuka's ability to absorb, or seal, had a flaw. That was, the ability sealed within the sword would never be able to improve. In other words, the ability user sealed within the sword would be at the 3rd level, and the ability Li Onping obtained would forever be at the 3rd level, unable to improve. As for the sword of Tatsuka, one person could only use 5 sealed abilities. They could not be changed or deleted, so the cultivator had to choose carefully. Li Onping also understood why the new monarch didn't absorb a bunch of abilities. It was obvious that he didn't want to absorb low-level abilities, so he chose to seal level 5 ability users. However, Li Onping didn't want to absorb level 5 ability users from the East Continent. He also didn't think that their abilities could increase his combat strength by much. Therefore, he chose New Danyang. Among these monsters infected by ash, there were many extremely powerful existences, many of them even comparable to level 5 ability users. Moreover, if he chose them, he wouldn't have to worry about a backlash within the country. Unlike if Li Onping directly chose the ability users under his command, perhaps it would cause everyone to panic. In addition, the appearance of the New Danyang had also given the entire Great Xia an endless opportunity. Li Onping had come to New Danyang for several reasons. The first was naturally the one mentioned above, which was to choose powerful monsters and seal their abilities through the sword of Tatsuka. The second was to use these monsters to study the sword of Tatsuka. Li Onping hoped to find a way to break through the limit of the sword of Tatsuka. It would be best if he could find a way to cultivate the abilities of the sword of Tatsuka. The third was that while searching for monsters, he found that he could subdue a group of monsters. There were many monsters in New Danyang, such as the tri-headed golden dragon and the black dragon in front of him. All of them had a certain level of intelligence. Li Onping wanted to subdue them and increase the strength of the Xia. After all, Takuchi Oda was only Ash's clone. He was already doing his best to keep these monsters in New Danyang. It was impossible to make them listen to his orders. In the end, it was because he wasn't strong enough. The fourth was that the environment here was more suitable for Li Onping's cultivation. It could help him adapt to his growing strength, and he could also practice and experiment with various secret martial arts here. Currently, the situation between the eastern and western camps was very tense. In addition to becoming stronger, Li Onping also needed a powerful army to carry out his will. If he had an army of tens of thousands of people, each with a sword of Tatsuka, practicing secret martial arts, and countless powerful monsters, then he wouldn't be afraid of them playing with him. Naturally, it wouldn't take long for him to conquer the western continent. The last goal was still Ash's body. Although Li Onping's body no longer had a bottleneck, his current body was too strong. With such a strong foundation, every bit of improvement required a huge amount of resources. Ordinary clones were too cheap. Other than replenishing soul energy, there was no other use. Now, even if Li Onping ate clones for a year, it would only increase his strength by a few tenths of a point, unless there was a new leap in cloning technology. However, this was not something Li Onping could control. Therefore, he wanted to see if he could devour Ash's body. However, the result made Li Onping very dissatisfied. He remembered the conversation he had with Black. Must it be a human? Can't we eat animals? Black laughed maniacally. Try getting a tiger to eat grass and a lion to eat vegetables. Humans are food that we must eat. Food that we must eat? Ever since he came to the New Eastern Sun, Li Onping had tried eating Ash's flesh and killing various monsters. He then monitored his body constantly to see if there were any effects. However, there were no effects. Although these foods would be absorbed and digested by his body to strengthen his body, it was just like how ordinary people would grow flesh by eating meat. There were no outstanding effects from devouring humans. It was just that the nutritional value was much higher than that of ordinary pork or beef. Just as Li Onping was thinking, he had already flown up to the 2 dragons. Looking at the 2 mud-like dragons, he smiled coldly and bellowed, "Stop pretending to be dead. Get up." The black dragon and the three-headed golden dragon, who looked like a pile of rotten meat earlier, got up and lay down before Li Onping like pet dogs, looking at him fawningly. Li Onping said calmly, "My patience is limited. This is the last time I'm asking you. Either you die or become my subordinates." Seeing that the two dragons were still dodging and hesitating, Li Onping's eyes narrowed slightly, and a hint of killing intent pounced toward the two dragons. Although Li Onping was not interested in the abilities of these two dragons, their overall strength was enough to fight against level 5 ability users. No, it should be said that their abilities were above that of level 5 ability users. It was just that they did not have as many techniques and tricks as humans. Their strength was already ranked in the top 20 in the new Eastern Sunday otherwise. Li Onping would not have spent so much time to subdue them. At this moment, the two dragons felt a hint of killing intent released by Li Onping and immediately trembled in fear. Under Li Onping's cold gaze, they finally lowered their heads, which were usually arrogant. After all, they were beasts and did not have as much self-respect and moral integrity as humans. Especially the black dragon, who lowered its head while crying out miserably, as if it was trying to gain sympathy. The three-headed golden dragon saw this and did not want to be outdone. It stretched all three of its heads towards Li Onping, opening its mouth as if it wanted to lick him. "Stop!" Li Onping reached out and stopped the three-headed golden dragon from approaching. Looking at the stinky mucus on its tongue, he did not want to be licked by this thing. On the side, the eyes of Therese and the others were still filled with shock. They looked at the two dragons, which could have easily killed them, lying in front of Li Onping like pets. However, after Claudia called out to Li Onping, their eyes were filled with worship, especially when Li Onping came to the side of the two dragons, and everyone saw his appearance clearly. This worship was overflowing from their eyes. After all, the Eastern continent was different from the Western continent. Ability users existed in the open, and, as the strongest among them, Li Onping, after a series of displays of strength and his unforgiving attitude towards the dark side of society, he had gained a lot of admirers. The only ones who did not have this kind of expression were Claudia and the family knights who came with her. Although Therese was not from Dessia, when he saw Li Onping training the two behemoths as if they were pet dogs, he also showed admiration and envy. He then turned his head to look at the gold mouse on his shoulder, which was still trembling in fear, and sighed. His pet was already very high-end in the eyes of others, but compared to Li Onping, it was so inferior that even the taillights could not be seen. At this moment, Claudia ran to Li Onping. No one in the group stopped her because Li Onping was the target they were looking for in District 69. Claudia ran to Li Onping angrily. Looking at his cold expression and thinking about the hardships she had gone through along the way, tears fell from her eyes uncontrollably. The sight of such a beautiful goddess crying made Therese and the others feel depressed. They could not help but want to comfort Claudia. However, with Li Onping at the side, how would they dare to do so? They could only look at him with envy. Li Onping did not react. He only asked, "How did you know I was here?" "Forget it. Tell me. Why are you looking for me?" Claudia turned her head and wiped away her tears. It was as if she did not want Li Onping to see her weak side. Hearing Li Onping's question, she let out a cold snort and said stiffly, "What else can I be here for? I'm here to ask when you're going to marry me. How long are you going to drag this out?" Chapter 272. After hearing Claudia's words, Li Onping sighed. He did not say anything. Instead, he said to Terith and the others, "You guys get on its back. Carry the unconscious people as well. I'll send you to a safe place." As he spoke, Li Onping pointed at the golden triceratops beside him. The golden triceratops reluctantly ran to Terith and the others. It crouched down and let Terith and the others climb up. Because it had 3 heads, its body was much thicker than the black dragon's. Its back was also much wider. Even if Terith and the others all sat on it, it would not feel crowded. Then, Li Onping patted Claudia's shoulder and walked up to the black dragon's back. "Come with me. We'll talk as we walk." Thus, under Li Onping's command, the black dragon and the golden triceratops flew into the sky again. However, in order to take care of Claudia, Terith, and the others, the two dragons deliberately slowed down and flew slowly toward District 69 West. Even if they slowed down, flying was much faster than Terith and the others' original walking speed. Moreover, the two dragons were one in front and one behind. Along the way, no monsters dared to provoke them. Even a large group of corpse birds turned around and left when they saw the two dragons. Looking at the endless wilderness under his feet and the blue sky above his head, Terith saw all kinds of monsters, some of which he could name, some of which he could not. He had never felt that he could be so relaxed in New Danyang. It felt like he was on a vacation. The people around him also relaxed. Some of them even fell asleep on the dragon's back. What a joke. Liamping was right beside them. It could be said that their surroundings had become the safest place in the world at this moment. On the other side, the atmosphere on the black dragon's back seemed to be a little awkward. Liamping was thinking about how to speak when Claudia spoke first. Am I not beautiful enough? Liamping shook his head. You are very beautiful. This has nothing to do with your appearance. Then why? Claudia asked. Is it because of my personality? I can change whatever you like. After we get married, I won't care how you play. As for children, whether you want them or not, I won't object to you having as many as you want. I will fulfill all the responsibilities of a wife. That's not the problem. Liamping sighed. Seeing that Claudia was unwilling to give up, he decided to tell her directly, You should know the difference between you and me, right? I'm talking about the physical. Seeing Claudia's doubtful look, Liamping said straightforwardly, With my current physical strength, I can even kill a dinosaur with a slap. If we get married, I'm worried that you won't live past a month, even if I'm careful. Claudia said, Just because of this? I'll be careful. Besides, I'm not your training partner. What are you worried about? You can't have domestic violence, right? Liamping did not expect the holy princess to be so slow. He could only continue to explain, I'm talking about when we sleep together at night. You understand, right? If you're not careful, I might tear you apart. I can't guarantee that I can control my strength every time I relax. It's too dangerous for you to be with me, unless you're willing to be a living widow. After hearing Liamping's words, how could Claudia not understand what he was talking about? Her fair face immediately flushed red. She lowered her head and looked at her feet with her big eyes. She said shyly, What are you talking about? This was the first time Liamping had seen the holy princess so shy. Compared to her usual valiant and heroic appearance, this kind of bashful, girlish appearance had a different flavor, as expected of the snow goddess of the Northern Kingdom. Liamping said, I'm speaking the truth. I can be very careful once or twice, but this kind of thing is a time to relax. I can't guarantee that I won't make any mistakes, unless you're willing to give up your happiness and be a living widow for most of your life. You should know that with my current status, if you marry me, you won't be able to find any other lovers in the future. Claudia did not say a word. He could only see that her exposed neck had already turned an alluring shade of pink. To be honest, Claudia was indeed the most beautiful woman Liamping had ever seen. The others, such as Li Qian, the Heavenly Queen, Xiao Xuesu, and so on, all had their own styles. However, only Claudia gave him a feeling of perfection. Furthermore, other than her exquisite face, Claudia was 176 meters tall. She had the slender figure unique to women in Ice Fortress. Furthermore, it was obvious that Claudia had been working out all year round, maintaining an excellent figure. She had a pair of long, straight legs, a pair of perky buttocks, and a chest of just the right size. Her skin was tender and tight, and she had long pink hair unique to her family, as expected of the national goddess of Ice Fortress. However, it was useless no matter how beautiful she was. An ordinary person was an ordinary person. With her physique, Liamping was worried that he would tear her apart if he used a little bit of strength. However, just as Liamping finished speaking, Claudia suddenly raised her head and said something with her cheeks flushed red. Her voice was too soft. Even if he stood beside Claudia, he probably wouldn't be able to hear it clearly. However, with Liamping's hearing, he could naturally hear it. However, he didn't seem to have expected her to say that. He asked with uncertainty. What did you say? Claudia glared fiercely at Li Onping and shouted, I said I could be on top. When the time comes, don't move. I'll do it. After saying this to a man she had only met a few times, Claudia seemed to have let go. She stared at him intently, bit her lips, and slowly said, Don't worry. I've learned from the nannies in the palace. Even if you don't move, you'll still feel comfortable. At this point, she seemed to be afraid that Li Onping wouldn't like it. So she added, If you don't like me being on top, every half a year, no, every month, we can change positions. But you must be careful. Li Onping patted his head, looking at the cute girl in front of him saying these words. It seemed to be completely out of his expectations. The most awkward thing was that, after hearing Claudia's seductive voice, he was actually a little tempted. He let out a breath and said, It's not that simple. Seeming to find it a little hard to say, Li Onping suddenly pointed to a mountain peak several hundred meters away. You can see that mountain peak, right? At this moment, the black dragon was about to fly over a mountain range. Claudia looked at the mountain peak they passed by and nodded. Look carefully. After saying this, Li Onping pursed his lips. He then spat a mouthful of saliva in the direction of the mountain peak. Claudia could only see him preparing to spit, but she couldn't see the trajectory of the saliva at all. She could only see Li Onping's lips pouting. Then, a series of loud sounds came from the direction of the mountain peak. In Claudia's eyes, the entire mountain peak seemed to have been hit by a meteor. Amidst the intense tremors, the place where it was hit caved in completely. Then, large pieces of mountain rocks collapsed, and many cracks appeared on the mountain walls. It was as if an earthquake had occurred, and it even caused a large number of wild beasts to cry out in alarm. Because of Li Onping's saliva, the entire mountain peak was shaved off by 3 stories. Frightened animals ran around everywhere on the plains. Even the black dragon under their feet trembled for a moment before returning to its original state. Glancing at the dumbfounded Claudia, Li Onping said, Do you understand now? It was just a mouthful of saliva earlier, but when we're together, once we have an orgasm, it might be a disaster for you. Claudia reacted. Although her expression was still bashful, her eyes revealed a hint of disappointment. She said softly, Can't you shoot outside? You still don't understand? This isn't something that can be solved by being careful or changing a method. Your body is already very good in the eyes of ordinary people, but to me, it's too weak. Breathing, air currents, a slight bump, a careless turn. All of these can kill you. However, Claudia's tenacity far exceeded Li Onping's imagination. She looked into Li Onping's eyes and said resolutely, It's fine. Thank you for telling me this in advance, but I can accept all of this. If I die because of this, I won't hold any grudges. As she spoke, Claudia walked up to Li Onping. She grabbed Li Onping's hand and let it cover her chest. Then she looked at Li Onping with a gentle expression. Chapter 273. Since Claudia had said so, Li Onping would not be pretentious. Feeling the touch of gentleness coming from his palm, he squeezed it slightly again. After waiting for more than a year, this was a rare opportunity. Although Claudia's cheeks were flushed, she remembered the teachings of the nannies in the palace. She mustered her courage and hugged Li Onping tightly. She blew hot air into his ear and said softly, Don't move. Let me try first. The bashful Claudia squatted down and then looked up at Li Onping. A few seconds later, her head began to bob up and down. But after a few moments, she raised her head again. A sparkling and translucent thread hung from the corner of her mouth. She frowned and said with a nervous expression, If you're coming, you should have reminded me earlier. But before she could finish her sentence, Li Onping reached out his hand and pressed it down. She began to breathe again. While Claudia was risking her life to serve Li Onping, Tareth and the others on the tri-headed golden dragon at the back could only see the black dragon suddenly increase its speed. Then, with a flap of its wings, it had already ascended several hundred meters. 10 minutes later, the twin dragons arrived at their destination. What entered everyone's eyes was a huge grassland. To the north of the grassland was a huge lake that was as clear as a sapphire. Beside the lake was a small wooden house. Although the scenery was very beautiful, it was too ordinary compared to the things on the grassland. On the tri-headed golden triceratops' back, everyone stared with wide eyes at the grassland under their feet. First, there was a huge fox. Although it was smaller than the black dragon, it was still more than 10 stories tall. Its body was covered in a layer of flame-like fur, and 9 huge tails swayed behind its buttocks. Although the fox was only lying lazily on the grassland, looking like it was basking in the sun, just its terrifying size and the oppressive feeling coming from its body were enough to make everyone on the dragon's back feel their hearts palpitate. On the other side, there was a huge stone man. His body was covered in burning green flames. The ground under his feet had completely turned into scorched earth. Before the vegetation had even started to burn, it had already turned into ashes. However, they were far from being the most eye-catching. Beside the lake, there was a red monster. The monster was about 2 to 3 meters tall and stood upright. Huge bone spurs grew from its elbows, back, and shoulders. There were also 2 huge horns on its head. Its huge claws were like deadly blades hanging on both sides of its body. Together with the muscles hidden under its skin, it gave off a feeling of endless ferocity. Other than that, the monster also had a long and thick tail, like a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus rex. The monster didn't look big, but the immense threat it exuded made Terith feel that it was even more dangerous than the tri-headed golden dragon. Terith's intuition was right. Lianping had called this demon-like monster destruction. It was also one of the top 3 monsters that he had found in New Danyang. Not only was its skin rough and thick, almost invulnerable, but it also had hundreds of tons of strength. It could also control fire, summon meteorites, and release red lightning to decompose matter into its molecular state. Its destructive power, both in terms of depth and scope, far exceeded that of Zhurong and Lei Di, who Lianping had encountered, who were domain ability users. Lianping almost mistakenly thought that this monster was also a member of Black's demon clan. However, he found that, like other monsters, it had no memory or consciousness. Most of the time, it fought with its instincts and bestial instincts. On the grassland, other than these 3 monsters that attracted Terith's attention, there were many other creatures of different sizes and shapes. In a few breaths, the 2 dragons had flown to the lake and slowly landed in front of the small wooden house. As the group got down from the dragon's back, Lianping patted the black dragon's body and said, "Find a nest nearby. Come when you hear my call." A gust of wind swept past, and the 2 dragons had already soared into the sky and gradually disappeared into the sky. Lianping said to Terith and the others, "Find a place to rest. Someone will come to pick you up in a few days." A few days later, Terith and the others were sent away by Takeuchi Seiji's people. Only Claudia insisted on staying, wanting to leave with Lianping. However, he only helped to take care of Lianping's food and daily life. Ever since that time on the dragon's back, Lianping once again focused on his work and did not do anything similar. The pleasure between a man and a woman was too little of a temptation for him. On the grassland, a hound with flames under its feet and flames jumping out of its body was lying on the ground. Its eyes were full of fear, but did not dare to move. It could only look at Lianping in front of it with a very pitiful look. However, Lianping was unmoved. He held the sword of Tatsuka in his right hand and inserted it inch by inch into the firehound's head. The hound looked at Lianping nervously, its body not moving at all. It was deeply afraid that the other party would accidentally kill it. The blade, which was over 10 centimeters long, had already pierced into the hound's head. Then it stopped. The hound felt as if its body was being controlled by a powerful force. It couldn't move at all. The flames in its body flowed from its limbs to the top of its head, and then were absorbed into the blade of the Tatsuka sword. Under Lianping's intentional control, this process became very slow, allowing him to feel in detail what the entire sealing process was all about. On the other hand, As the flames on the hound's body were absorbed, the flames that were originally burning on the hound's body were gradually extinguished. From a monster that could breathe fire, it slowly turned into an ordinary pet dog. But just as the flames on its body were about to be completely absorbed, Li Anping suddenly shook the blade and pulled the sword of Tatsuka out of the hound's body. As the purple demonic light lit up, Li Anping swung the blade to the sky. A ball of flames shot up from the sword and turned into a meteor, slowly disappearing into the sky. The hound looked at the sky in a daze. Its ability disappeared just like that. It barked in confusion. Only a trace of fire came out of its mouth. That was the last bit of its ability left. Li Anping's purpose was naturally not to see the hound's ability to breathe fire. The real purpose of what he did just now was to observe the whole process of the sword of Tatsuka absorbing and sealing the ability. During his research, he had already found a way to stop the process. It was also the reason why he dared to experiment. Otherwise, every time he did such an experiment, he would have to occupy an empty slot of the ability. Next to Li Anping, Bai Xinghe asked curiously, "How is it? Can you find a conversion formula?" Li Anping shook his head. "There's not enough time. I need to experiment again." Bai Xinghe was naturally called over by Li Anping some time ago. As an expert who had learned all the secret martial arts 2,000 years ago and was now able to push the ability of the ancient class to the 5th level, he naturally had a deep understanding of the abilities of the ancient class. Li Anping had called him over to help him perfect the sword of Tatsuka and organize all the abilities of the ancient class. Li Anping recalled the whole process of the experiment. Every flow of energy and every change of the sword reappeared in his mind. Tens of thousands of possibilities flashed in Li Anping's mind, only to be ruled out one by one. With his superhuman brain, Li Anping alone could do what could only be done by a supercomputer. Bai Xinghe was standing aside. He did not have a superhuman brain like Li Anping and could only wait quietly. During this period of time, he had already gotten used to Li Anping's research methods and his monstrous computing power. Compared to the ancient times when they could only fumble in the dark, the two of them now had modern scientific theories as the foundation and could study the secret martial arts more efficiently. It was also why Bai Xinghe had been amazed. During Li Anping's seclusion for more than a year, he had absorbed all kinds of scientific knowledge like a sponge. He had also learned the modern secret martial arts that had been developed for more than 2,000 years in the Baiwei Empire. More than half an hour later, Li Anping's eyes were clear again. A series of formulas and figures were reported out of his mouth. Bai Xinghe, who was standing nearby, listened carefully and offered his opinion now and then. Chapter 274. In the sky, Li Anping and Bai Xinghe passed by each other. After a huge explosion, they separated the air from each other and created a corridor that was almost empty before they crashed into each other again. Bai Xinghe's hair and beard were all standing up. His spiritual energy surged out like furiously burning flames, which were unleashed wave after wave of immense strength together with his fists. At this moment, his hands, feet, elbows, knees, shoulders, and every other part of his body seemed to have turned into a deadly weapon. Countless secret martial arts were employed: quaking, crushing, blasting, lightning, fire, freezing. As Li Anping launched his attacks, all kinds of forces were flashing in the air. He was like a god of destruction who had grasped terrifying strength, unleashing his merciless attacks on Li Anping. But on Li Anping's side, he simply stood still in midair and slightly changed his posture according to the angle of Bai Xinghe's attack. Above his palm, a cluster of black spiritual energy was gathered. No matter what kind of attack was launched, Li Anping blocked it with the cluster of black spiritual energy. The cluster of black spiritual energy was quite weird, too. It was like a black hole. No matter what kind of attack it was faced with, it vanished without a sound. The dozens of monsters on the prairie looked at the two figures in the sky with intense wariness in their eyes. Hundreds of sword auras darted out of Li Anping's fingertips again. But before they reached 1 meter from Li Anping's palm, They were all twisted and absorbed into the cluster of black spiritual energy inside Li Onping's palm. Bai Xing has stopped attacking, too. Standing on the ground, he shouted at Li Onping in midair, "How is it?" Li Onping's body landed on the ground. He grabbed the black mass of psyche chi with one hand and crushed it as if he was squeezing air. A muffled boom came from his palm. He shook his head in dissatisfaction. The conversion rate of the force is about 70%. The conversion rate of the heat is 30%, and the conversion rate of the electricity is less than 10%. The rest of the energy has been unleashed on me. In the next moment, the two of them discussed and modified the experiment according to the result. Bai Xing's previous attack had been an experiment for the two of them. During this period of time, the two of them had researched the Tatsuka sword and created a secret martial art that Li Onping had just used. It was called the Chaos Barrier. However, this Chaos Barrier wasn't complete yet. It couldn't convert all attacks into psychic energy, and the excess energy would be released on the user's body. Fortunately, Li Onping had the ultra-rapid regeneration physique, so he was safe. Also, even if it was perfected, it would not be the purpose of Li Onping and Bai Xinghe. They had developed it only so that they could understand the features of the 10-arm sword that could absorb all abilities. Immediately, Li Onping introduced a series of data that he had obtained from the experiment. Then, while discussing with Bai Xinghe, they began to design the plan of the next experiment. In the distance, a black dragon descended from the sky. In its mouth was a monster the size of a truck that looked like a wild boar. During this period of time, the hunting missions were done by the powerful monsters in the vicinity. If Takeuchi Aoda chose a new powerful monster, he would also pick a few of them to tame the monster together. Li Onping, on the other hand, had devoted most of his attention to the secret martial arts with Bai Xinghe. Not just the Tatsuka sword, it was their goal to integrate all the secret martial arts, too. Li Onping hoped that the secret martial arts, which were the abilities of the ancient school, could be systematized. It would be best if they could be classified into categories like primary school textbooks so that everybody could practice and learn them. But judging from the current situation, the goal was still far away and almost impossible to be realized. There were too many kinds of secret martial arts. Everybody's aptitude was different. It was not easy to create a secret martial art that everybody could practice step by step. He and Bai Xinghe could only invent a few secret martial arts that everybody could practice, but could only lay the foundation for the ordinary people. Basically, they could not practice any abilities. As for their experiment subject, it was Claudia, who was sitting cross-legged next to the lake. Over this period of time, Claudia had been taking care of Li Onping's daily needs while watching him and Bai Xinghe study secret martial arts every day. Therefore, she wanted to ask Li Onping to give her a kind of practice, preferably one that could strengthen her body. But Li Onping felt that even if Claudia started practicing now, it would take her many years to learn which secret martial art she learned. It would be better for her to practice the basic martial art that he and Bai Xinghe had developed together. Although she would not be able to practice any abilities, Li Onping believed that this martial art, which relied on the most advanced theories, the best martial artists, and the integration of countless classics and experiments, would definitely improve very quickly. It could also help the practitioner build a good foundation. In the future, when they chose a secret martial art that was suitable for them, they would be able to practice it with twice the result with half the effort. Claudia was sitting cross-legged with her eyes closed and her palms facing the sky. She was adjusting her breathing according to the method that Li Onping had taught her. At the same time, on the Marin Highlands in the southern border, the leader of the Avengers, Peter Parker, was hiding in a cave. His hair was curly and covered in all kinds of grease and dirt. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked very tired. Below his right elbow, his entire palm was wrapped in layers of gauze. The pain that came from there every minute and every second made the flames of hatred in Peter Parker's heart burn even brighter. Beside him, one of his team members said in despair, "Big brother, what should we do?" This time, Bird's group sent people to North Yen. That guy is a lunatic. Now, half of our people have been killed by him. The search team is getting closer and closer. Peter Parker's eyes were in a trance. He could not help but think of what he had been through all these years. Golden Light, who had been tracking them down, had suppressed them to the point of suffocation. In the beginning, Peter Parker was still able to exchange a few blows with him. But that guy seemed to be improving every day. Every time Peter Parker felt that he had become stronger, he would crush him with even greater strength. Until now, Peter Parker had advanced to the 4th energy level at an unprecedented speed. But he still had no confidence in facing Golden Light. If he did not have super strong intuition and super agile movements, he might have been caught by the other party. More than a year ago, because the news of Li Onping destroying Dongyang alone appeared on the news, more than 90% of the Avengers chose to leave. Peter Parker faced the second collapse of the team. But fortunately, Golden Light, who had been chasing them closely, left for some reason. Then, Peter Parker and his team members escaped from Dixia and came to the southern border, trying to pull the team together again. Although there were very few people who dared to join the Avengers because of Li Onping's ferocity, there were many people who dared to join the Avengers. But Li Onping had too many enemies. There were always people who were lucky, ambitious young people, or idealists who wanted to resist Li Onping's dictatorship. They felt that one day, they would be able to defeat Li Onping. These people were all targets that the Avengers wanted to rope in. But a month ago, they made a rare move. They attacked a politician who supported Li Onping in France. As a result, the Xia Dragonfinch pounced on them like a vulture smelling the scent. This time, the one in charge of dealing with the Avengers was Yin Bei, who was known as the Xia's twin stars, along with Golden Light. If Golden Light was an expert that the people of Dixia were all familiar with, then Yin Bei was a terrifying killing god known only to the underworld. His collapse ability had killed who knew how many resistance forces in the past year. The fallen nobles of the Ice Fortress, the anti-government sects of the 100 Moons, and some holy war organizations in the southern border. In the underworld, because of his cruelty and savagery, his reputation was much greater than Golden Light's, and he was much more terrifying. They were practically two sides, one bright and one dark. The two of them were also considered to be the Xia Dragonfinch's most likely next-level 5 ability user. Thinking of Yin Bei, Peter Parker's heart burned with anger. His right palm had been slightly grazed by Yin Bei's collapse ability, and it had almost turned into a pile of rotten meat. In the past few days of pursuit, the Xia Dragonfinch basically didn't have a single casualty, while the Avengers were on the verge of being completely wiped out. The unwillingness in Peter Parker's heart could almost fill the heavens and the earth. His goal was to defeat Li Onping, but from beginning to end, Li Onping hadn't made a move against him at all. Just his influence alone had almost destroyed his organization time and time again. And Li Onping's subordinates had chased him like a dog for 2 consecutive days. Every night, Peter Parker would tell himself that as long as he persevered, the revolution would succeed, and one day, Li Onping would fall at his feet. But Li Onping displayed unstoppable strength time and time again, shattering his hopes time and time again. I can't win. I really can't win. The difference in strength is just too great. God, why did you create such a monster? Just as Peter Parker was in a daze, one of his subordinates rushed in. He held a phone in his hand and said to Peter Parker, "Teacher is calling." Peter Parker frowned. Of course, he knew who this member who was addressed as teacher was. A year ago, he was the one who had rescued him from the hands of the great Xia Dragonfinch. It was the reporter who had been assassinated, Tian Haowen. "Hello, I've discovered a big secret." Tian Haowen's voice was trembling. "Li Onping is finished this time. I want to destroy his reputation." Just as Peter Parker was about to ask Tian Haowen what he had discovered, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several consecutive sounds came from the sky outside the cave. Peter Parker couldn't be more familiar with this sound. In the past half a month, every time this demon-like sound rang out, it meant that the Avengers were about to face heavy casualties again. Outside the cave, an explosive roar came from the sky. "The Xia Dragonfinch is on the job. You've been surrounded. Surrender, and you'll be spared." The next moment, A terrifying distortion and tearing sound pierced through the entire cave. The rock above Peter Parker's head had been broken by the force of the collapse, and Yin Bei's arrogant voice sounded. "Bugs of the Avengers, I'm sorry, but I personally don't accept surrender, so you're about to die." Chapter 275. As Yin Bei walked through the ruins, he scanned the corpses on the ground with his eyes. He was wearing a black combat suit with his hands behind his back. He walked through the mountains of corpses like the Grim Reaper. His combat boots were stained with blood. Because of his collapsing ability, there were no complete corpses within 100 meters of Yin Bei. The subordinates who were cleaning up the scene looked at Yin Bei with a cold expression. None of them dared to talk to him. Yin Bei's murderous nature was too strong in every battle. Coupled with his destructive ability, he always created a hellish scene that made it difficult for people to get close to him. If Jin Guang was the son that people could not help but admire and want to get close to, then Yin Bei was a black hole that was cold, merciless, and terrifying. A minute later, one of the subordinates came to Yin Bei's side and reported carefully, "Sir, we've checked the area. We didn't find Peter Parker's body." After saying this, he looked at Yin Bei carefully. Seeing that he did not show any dissatisfaction, he asked, "Sir, do we need the search team to continue the pursuit?" Yin Bei smirked as his eyes glinted coldly. "Nonsense. Ask the local government to send someone to search for it. I'll definitely crush this bug within 3 days." 3 months later, at Xia's capital airport. On the airport runway, there were bodyguards dressed in black and wearing earphones. A group of great Xia leaders in suits and leather shoes were eagerly waiting here. Between their brows, there was uncontrollable anticipation and nervousness. However, overall, it was still considered quiet. In contrast, the team that was responsible for presenting flowers and playing music was not so quiet. A little boy who looked to be in his teens said excitedly with flowers in his hands, "That's so cool. If the guys in class knew that the person I'm presenting flowers to is Sir Li Onping, they'll be so jealous of me." A little girl of about the same age sighed. "I'd rather it was Lord Golden Light who came. How handsome is that?" Although the little girl was very cute, and the little boy liked her very much, when he heard that his idol had been defeated, he still said excitedly, "What do you know? What's the use of being handsome? Besides, although Jin Guang is famous, it's only because he was praised. The most powerful person in Xia is still Mr. Li Onping." Mr. Li Onping alone suppressed Bai Wei and Danyang. Seeing the little girl's astonished gaze, as well as the curious gazes of her companions, the little boy said proudly, "Humph, humph. You'll be scared to death if I tell you this. When we were 100 months old, Lord was completely unscathed, even in the center of a nuclear explosion." He then proudly continued, "My brother has awakened his ability and was chosen to join Academy City. This year, he'll be joining the second batch of students. He told me all of this." Don't think that there hasn't been any news about Lord Li Onping recently. He's actually been cultivating. It's said that he can knock down the moon with a single punch. "Really?" Another young man said in disbelief. "You're bluffing, aren't you?" Ignoring the argument of the few children, the adults in the performance team were also full of anticipation. "I didn't expect to see Lord Li Onping. I heard that Mr. Li Onping came back this time to participate in the selection of the emperor and inherit the throne." Another person said, "Isn't that so? But from what I see, today's standard is too low. Why didn't they call more people? Look over there, there are only a few media outlets." Of course, they didn't know that Li Onping had specifically asked the welcoming team to be more low-key. But even though he said that, Wang Cheng didn't dare to be too negligent. He was afraid that if the team was too shabby, it would make Li Onping unhappy. In the end, he arranged for such a nondescript scene. He planned to immediately dismiss the extra people if Li Onping's expression changed. At the same time, in the sky above the East China Sea, a huge passenger plane was flying in the direction of the capital airport. This huge floating palace originally belonged to Wang Chong's private plane. However, after learning that Li Onping was going to take a plane back from Danyang, the plane was directly transferred to Li Onping's name. In the bedroom of the plane, Li Onping was lying on the sofa. His fingers brushed the TV remote control from time to time, and the channels on the TV screen jumped continuously under his control. Claudia sat beside him, leaning her head on Li Onping's shoulder. Her fingertips brushed the other party's inner thighs from time to time, a pair of beautiful legs wrapped in black stockings. She didn't wear shoes and just rested on the sofa, showing off the curves of her round and slender thighs without reservation. Claudia's delicate cheeks blushed a little, revealing a charm that was enough to make a man's blood rush. However, faced with such an erotic scene, Li Onping's countenance remained cold and unmoved. When Claudia's fingertips brushed against his body once again, he finally grabbed Claudia's hand and said calmly, "All right, do you want this plane to crash?" Claudia's cheeks flushed red, but she still stubbornly looked into Li Onping's eyes and said, "I just want you to feel comfortable. If there's a need, I'll look for you. Don't do anything unnecessary." Hearing this, Claudia nodded and immediately sat up straight. She started to watch the TV together with Li Onping. The TV stopped at the news channel, which was broadcasting the news of the 2 astronauts from the Xia landing on the moon today. After watching for a while, Claudia felt a little bored and couldn't help but ask, "Right now, the whole world is in an arms race, and everyone wants to invest all their money into researching new powerful weapons. Sir, why did you think of letting them land on the moon?" Li Onping said softly, to take back something. On the TV screen, there was an interview with the 2 astronauts on the moon. "Hello, Wang Wei. We can see that you're moving forward on the surface of the moon. Can you hear us? It's very clear. Can you tell us what you're doing?" "I'm planning to look for some purple rock samples." On the moon, while the 2 astronauts were being interviewed, they were running and jumping on the surface of the moon. At a place where the camera couldn't see, a figure darted out from the spaceship and headed into the distance like a sharp arrow. 5 minutes later, a huge crater appeared in front of his eyes. It was surrounded by collapsed mountains and rubble. In the center of the crater, there was a bottomless cave. The figure stopped, and they could see that he was also wrapped up in a thick layer of spacesuit. He was talking into a communication device. "Huang Yuan base, this is Chong, E3. I think I found the target." "All right, Sir Emma. Please follow the plan and use the detector to find the target's exact location." Chapter 276. Li Onping was no longer watching the live broadcast of the moon landing in the news. He had just received the news that Emma had started to use her ability to dig out the adamantium longsword. In about 1 to 2 weeks, the longsword would return to Li Onping's hands. In fact, although Li Onping liked the adamantium longsword very much, the reason why he took it back this time was mostly because of the sword of Tatsuka. After 3 months of research, Li Onping and Bai Xinghe had discovered the general reason why the sword of Tatsuka could not cultivate its sealed ability. First of all, it was the limitation of the era. It was undeniable that the inventor of the sword of Tatsuka was indeed a genius, but he was still limited by the era. When the sword of Tatsuka was invented, there were no level 5 ability users in the world. At that time, people thought that level 4 ability was the highest level of ability. Therefore, the inventor of the sword of Tatsuka obviously did not consider level 5 and above abilities. Secondly, it was the strength of the sword. Also, because there were no level 5 abilities, the sword of Tatsuka itself was also made by level 4 ability users. Although there were many of them, the strength of the sword itself could only support level 5 abilities. The replacement method used by the new king might not be able to support level 6 abilities with normal materials. Therefore, in order to solve the problem of the sword of Tatsuka, Li Onping had to solve the problem of the sword's material first. Li Onping planned to use the adamantium longsword. Secondly, he had to cultivate the sealed ability in the sword of Tatsuka. Li Onping already had a clue about this, but he still needed more data and experiments. He left these trivial matters to Bai Xinghe, who stayed in New Dongyang, to handle. However, in this way, Li Onping could only make one sword of Tatsuka that could be cultivated unless he could find more adamantium in the League of Stars. In addition, Li Onping and Bai Xinghe had also written a book on basic martial arts in the past 3 months. They had already handed it over to Academy City to be used as a teaching material for physical education. Although there was no way to promote the ancient ability to the general public for the time being, it was still a good idea to use it to improve the basic qualities of ability users. As for Teishi Yoda, he was in charge of the monsters subdued by Li Onping. After further training in their discipline and obedience, they would be sent to Xia to shoulder various missions. When the time comes, this monster army will become a powerful force in Xia. However, there were too many monsters in New Danyang. Li Onping had only subdued the monsters that he knew so far. There were still many monsters whose strength he did not know, so he left them to Teishi Yoda. With the monster army in his hands, there should be no problem. If it still did not work, he could only wait for Li Onping's next visit to New Danyang. While thinking about these trivial matters, Li Onping flipped through the tablet in front of him. The contents were all Xia's policies and changes during this period, as well as reports from various senior executives. What Li Onping was looking at right now was the report of Tang Weian, who had been undercover in the Western continent for more than a year. According to him, the entire Western continent had lost track of the League of Stars, just like how the League of Stars had never existed in the world. This powerful international organization in the past had disappeared like a puff of smoke. The territory and resources that originally belonged to them had also been digested by the 3 superpowers. Therefore, the mental gem that Li Onping wanted to find was naturally nowhere to be found. As for the monsters that Li Onping had specifically asked Tang Weian to pay attention to, this epidemic had caused great damage to the Code Nation. The entire northern part of the Code Nation had been flooded by endless monsters. The Order of Universal Truth had used a 100-meter-high city wall to encircle the entire infected area of millions of square kilometers. At present, Tang Weian had used his shape-shifting ability to sneak into the Order of Universal Truth. More detailed data on the monsters would be sent to him next time. Li Onping was thinking about whether he should send more people to investigate the monsters and the whereabouts of the League of Stars. However, the international situation was tense at the moment. Any action taken by Xia might cause unnecessary panic in the Western continent. After all, hundreds of thousands of nuclear bombs were stored in their silos, waiting to be fired. At this moment, Li Onping frowned and sneered. There's actually someone who wants to die. Capital Airport Command Tower. Hello, UC-027. Please reply if you copy. You have deviated from your flight path. UC-027. Please turn around immediately. If you continue like this, you will collide with another flight. A few minutes later, chaos broke out in the command tower. A large passenger plane flying from the capital of the ice fortress to Tianjin suddenly lost contact with it. It changed its flight path and crashed into the sky above the East China Sea. If it continued to maintain its flight path, it would collide with Li Onping's private plane in 5 minutes. After hearing the news from the Xia Dragonfinch, Li Onping opened the cabin door. Strong winds blew into the cabin, and the terrifying pressure difference seemed like it was going to destroy everything. The next second, Li Onping stepped out of the cabin and closed the cabin door. At an altitude of 10,000 meters, a terrifying gust of wind blew against Li Onping's body. However, he was like a hard rock. He didn't move at all, and it didn't react at all. The nihility force field turned into the most solid ground, supporting the soles of his feet at all times. Li Onping's eyes seemed to be able to see through countless spaces and directly swept toward the passenger plane flying in from the north. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he had already turned into a black line, charging in the direction of the passenger plane. The powerful force directly tore open a vacuum corridor in midair, and the hurricane set off even blew Li Onping's private plane to the side. Li Onping silently apologized in his heart. The next moment, he had already appeared beside the passenger plane, trying to maintain the same speed as the plane. He had already gently pressed his palm on the fuselage of the plane. 5 minutes ago, in flight UC-027, 6 short, Thin and weak Nanjiang people were holding machine guns and looking at the passengers in the seats with malicious eyes. No one dared to make a sound, and no one dared to resist. All the passengers lowered their heads silently, praying in their hearts that this flight would be fine. At this moment, a bearded man walked out from the driver's seat. His beast-like, aggressive gaze swept across all the passengers present. "Everyone, please rest assured. We are members of the Western Crusade organization. As long as you cooperate with us, the plane will land safely in half an hour." But, speaking of this, the bearded man's face revealed a ferocious expression. "If you don't cooperate in any way, I will have to wash this plane with blood to ensure the completion of the plan. Believe me, this is definitely not what you want to see." Then he suddenly raised his right hand high above his head and began to shout in Western Crusade. In the same way, several other members of the Crusade organization with guns also raised their hand high above their heads and shouted the same slogan. They shouted in Western Crusade, and only a few Western Crusade passengers could barely understand them. It was probably something like defeating Li Onping, defeating the dictatorship, liberating Western Crusade, withdrawing from the Pan-Continent Alliance, and so on. However, these people seemed to have composed songs for these slogans. Now a group of people was singing, just like some kind of religious song. With the slogan, their eyes revealed bursts of fanaticism, as if they were fanatics who were about to be martyred and were no longer afraid of death. Listening to the hymns of these dangerous people, the passengers present were even more frightened. Looking at the fanatical faces of these people, they did not dare to resist at all. In the cockpit, a rather gentle-looking member of the Crusade organization with glasses was holding a pistol and pointing the muzzle at the captain. "Immediately do as I said before. Change direction immediately." The captain's forehead was full of cold sweat. He reluctantly explained, "We can't do this casually. We're close to the capital airport of Xia, and there are very many flights coming and going. If we change the course casually, it is likely that there will be a collision, and the fuel of the passenger plane is limited. In the direction you pointed out, there is no airport for us to land. Don't make excuses for me." The gentle-looking man pulled the safety of the pistol and put the muzzle at the back of the captain's head. He said coldly, "I will count to 3. If you don't want to regret it, you'd better change the course immediately." The captain felt the coldness from the muzzle. His face was pale, but he still insisted, "No, I can't joke about the lives of more than 300 people on the entire passenger plane." The gentle-looking man snorted and turned the muzzle directly to the co-pilot. A soft sound came from the muzzle with a silencer. The co-pilot's eyes widened, and he stared blankly at the blood on his chest, then fell down directly. The captain said angrily, "What are you doing?" With the muzzle pressed against the captain's head, the gentle man roared hysterically, "I just want you to understand that in order to complete the plan, in order to defeat Li Onping, I could do anything, kill anyone. Now, change the course for me, quickly." The captain's face was red with anger, but in the end, he was forced by the gentle-looking man to change the course and flew toward Li Onping's private plane. But less than 5 minutes after he flew out, the whole plane suddenly shook violently, and then a terrible, tearing sound came from the cabin. Chapter 277. When Li Onping's palm gently pressed down on the plane's cabin, the entire plane was instantly encompassed by the virtual force field. Li Onping scanned the entire cabin with his psychic energy, and within 1 second, he roughly understood what was going on. Is this a hijacking? At the next moment, the entire plane trembled and started to slow down under the effects of the virtual force field. It was as if the plane had been grabbed by a huge hand. Li Onping was planning to use the virtual force field to support this plane and send him to the capital airport. Everyone in the cabin felt the abnormal tremors, and most of the passengers started to panic. What's going on? Did we encounter air currents? Are they going to blow up the plane? There are also people who lower their heads and close their eyes, praying incessantly, Amitabha, Amitabha, seeing that the entire cabin was in chaos, with a few passengers even attempting to stand up. The bearded member of the crusade bellowed furiously. "All of you, be quiet. I'll kill whoever dares to move." As he spoke, he aimed his machine gun at a male passenger who was eager to stand up. Following his instructions, the other hijackers also aimed their machine guns at the nearby passengers. "Hey, brother, don't be nervous." The face of the male passenger, who had the gun muzzle pointed at him, immediately turned pale. He waved his hand and sat back down. Seeing that the passengers in the cabin had quietened down once again, the bearded man nodded and signaled to his companions with his gaze. He then planned to turn around and head to the cockpit to take a look. He was also worried that something might have happened to the plane earlier. However, at the moment he turned around, his pupils suddenly dilated, and he looked at the top of the cabin in astonishment. He saw an arm piercing through the exterior of the plane easily, as if it was tofu, and reaching in. Then another hand reached in, and as easily as tearing open a packaging, Li Onping tore a huge hole in the top of the plane. The bearded man cried out, "Be careful. It's an ability user." At the next moment, a human silhouette had already descended from the hole in the top of the plane. In a world that mortals could not see, the black psyche chi filled the gap and isolated the airflow inside and outside the plane. The moment Li Onping landed, the 6 hijackers had already aimed their guns at him. 6 sparks lit up in the cabin at the same time. Accompanied by the crisp sound of gunfire, the bullet curtain of death enveloped Li Onping. Li Onping's superhuman perception, speed, and reflexes, as well as the psychic chi that covered the entire plane, allowed him to see the world as if it were in slow motion. The bullets flying through the air, the twisted expressions of the hijackers, and the panicked looks of the passengers all fell into his eyes. There are a total of 7 hijackers. Other than the 6 in front of me, there is one more person in the cockpit. One of the crew members died. There are no casualties among the passengers for now. 6 bullets missed, 2 passengers will be killed. The plane is too fragile. Let's use our abilities to attack first. A series of messages flashed through Li Onping's mind like lightning. The black psyche chi had already frozen all the bullets in midair. This was a method that Qing Chan had used in the past by relying on the massive amount of psyche chi. Although Li Onping's current total amount of psyche chi was still not comparable to that of Qing Chan, it was more than enough in a cramped environment like the plane. After using the psyche chi to freeze the bullets, a powerful force swept across. The 6 hijackers' vision turned black, and they lost consciousness and fainted on the ground. Their souls were all absorbed by Li Onping in an instant. When ordinary people faced Li Onping head-on, they did not even have the right to escape. In everyone's eyes, they could only hear the sound of gunshots, and the 6 ferocious hijackers had already fallen to the ground. The air around them was filled with motionless bullets. Mortals could not see psyche chi. Therefore, to them, the bullets were motionless in midair. In the next second, all the bullets fell to the ground, making a series of sounds. Looking at the passengers who were still in shock, Li Onping shouted, "It's okay now. The criminals have been taken care of. However, before the plane lands, please stay in your seats and don't move." Li Onping had just finished speaking when he saw a flash of light suddenly appear in the passenger cabin. Someone was taking pictures of him with their cell phone. "It's Lord Li Onping. We're safe. Long live Li Onping. Long live the Xia." Looking at the passengers who took out their cell phones and started taking pictures, and some who started cheering, hugging, and crying tears of joy, Li Onping shook his head and walked in the direction of the cockpit. Originally, with the radius of his soul absorption, he could have killed this member of the crusade directly. However, this was the last person. Li Onping still intended to keep him alive and hand him over to Yang Guang and the others. They might be able to get some information out of him. He pushed on the cockpit door and realized that it was locked. Once the cockpit door of a plane like this was locked from the inside out, it would be impossible for the people outside to open it. It should be fine if I use a little bit of force, right? Li Onping's palm touched the cockpit door, and the entire door started to vibrate intensely. It was as if a huge hand was kneading it, and it kept on shrinking toward the center of the door. Under the horrified gazes of the two people behind the entire door was kneaded into a metal ball the size of a fist by the virtual field. Then Li Onping grabbed it in his hand. Behind the cockpit door, the cultured man was holding a gun to the captain's head. When he saw that it was Li Onping who had appeared behind the cockpit door, endless fury and agitation flashed in his eyes. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something. However, he realized that his body was no longer under his control. The black psychic aura that he could not even see had already encompassed his entire body. He could not even think of saying a single word, let alone firing a gun. Li Onping could not be bothered to listen to the cries of such a small fry. After subduing the other party, he sat down in the co-pilot seat and said to the captain, "Give me directions. I'll send the plane to the capital airport." But the reply to the captain was Li Onping slowly raising his palm. As Li Onping raised his palm, the entire plane started to rise. Then, as Li Onping's palm turned, the entire plane started to turn. Initially, Li Onping did not need to move his palm to control the virtual field. However, in order to let the captain understand it faster, he made this move. It was as if the entire plane was moving along with the movement of his palm. The captain looked at Li Onping in astonishment. It was only then that he seemed to have recognized Li Onping's identity. He said excitedly, "Sir, is this your superpower?" Li Onping threw him a glance and nodded. "I've never learned how to fly a plane before. Give me directions to the capital airport." The captain nodded excitedly. He had not expected that he would be able to work together with Li Onping today. Then, he started to restore communication with the control tower while telling Li Onping the approximate direction to the capital airport in as straightforward a manner as possible. In fact, Li Onping only needed to know the direction. His nihility force field was like an invisible hand holding the plane. It was basically like a child holding a toy plane. The plane was completely under his control. It could be said that he could command it like an arm. 20 minutes later, the plane appeared in the sky above the capital airport. Li Onping followed the instructions from the control tower and landed the plane on a runway. The next day, the news of the plane robbery filled the front pages of all the newspapers. Li Onping's name once again swept through the internet and various major media outlets. However, unlike the ordinary people, many of Desia's higher-ups had their attention on Li Onping's private plane. They realized Claudia had returned to the capital airport with Li Onping on the private plane. And the information they received from the crew of the private plane, especially the stewardesses, made them even more anxious. In certain directions, they had already fallen behind the ice fortress barbarians. In the imperial study in the palace, Yang Guang and Yin Bei were reporting the recent events to Li Onping. Li Onping stroked his chin and said slowly, "Have you found out anything about the Crusaders?" Yang Guang replied, "Actually, we've been following the Crusaders since half a year ago. However, their members are all ordinary people. Although they're not strong in direct combat, they're very good at sabotaging things behind the scenes. They specialize in recruiting the civilians and orphans of Southern Border, especially Inchi. Furthermore, Southern Border doesn't have our intelligence network yet. Although we've wiped them out a few times, they've always reappeared like weeds. We suspect that the Western countries are funding them." Chapter 278. The Holy War Organization was one of the terrorist organizations born after most of the countries in the Eastern continent joined the Pan-Continental Alliance. It was similar to the Blood Source of the Ice Fortress and the Avengers of Nanjiang. Originally, there were similar radical organizations in Donyang. However, in order to survive in Donyang, they had to be protected by Tuchi Aotai. Therefore, similar organizations were quickly destroyed in Donyang. Yang Guang looked at Li Onping's face and did not see any change. Then he continued, "The leader of this holy war organization is very mysterious. He has never appeared in front of his subordinates. We know nothing about him, but there is no doubt that he has a strong ability to incite, mobilize, and organize people. His slogan is to liberate the entire Nanjiang. He has a strong ability to confuse people. He can often brainwash some of the less educated Nanjiang people and turn them into fanatics of his organization. For example, in this hijacking case, the people involved all had the belief that they would die. And because of the huge amount of financial support behind them, their destructive power has been greatly increased. Li Onping nodded and tapped the table in front of him with the knuckles of his fingers. Tell me about the survivor. His name is Saslo, a Flemish. He was originally a university student studying in the Ice Fortress, but someone introduced him to participate in the Holy War last year. Yang Guang organized his words and continued. According to his confession, after he returned to Flemish this winter, he participated in a series of training. He even applied to drop out of school, gave up his university studies, and cut off contact with his parents. They have been preparing for this hijacking operation for half a year. The goal is to warn de Xia and stimulate the resistance movement in Flemish, and so on. Li Onping asked, did he tell you all this himself? Of course not. Yang Guang frowned and said, this guy's been seriously brainwashed. After the conventional interrogation did not work, we used a little trick, but it was not very effective. In the end, we could only ask a few ability users from the Wang family to hypnotize him. Speaking of this, Yang Guang's eyes showed a little anger. Sir, although the members of the Holy War organization are ordinary people, their ideas are too fanatical. Each of them is like a lunatic who is not afraid of death. The destruction they cause is getting bigger and bigger. I suggest that we set up our intelligence network in Nanjiang as soon as possible and completely eliminate this organization. Li Onping did not say anything and did not immediately agree, because this was not something that could be done just because he wanted to. This was because the essence and the most powerful part of de Xia's intelligence system came from Li Qian's ability. However, Li Qian also had a limit. Unless her energy level could be increased again, as the surveillance range expanded, there would be a time when her ability was insufficient. However, Li Onping thought about it. After all, Li Qian was not talented people like Jing Guang, Bai Xinghe, or Emma. Although her ability was powerful, it was not certain that she could continuously improve it in a short period of time. Moreover, Li Qian's surveillance ability could obtain very detailed information about the target. It would be a waste to use it for large-scale surveillance in the long run. Perhaps, on a large scale, it would be better to use high-tech surveillance methods. As for the individual important people, it would be better to use Li Qian's ability to monitor them. Thinking of this, Li Onping arranged the complete integration of the intelligence data on the agenda. The so-called complete integration of the intelligence data meant that all the personal data and personal information would be integrated into the national intelligence network that Momo had developed. For example, everyone's mobile phone information, everyone's online accounts, IP addresses, and computer information were all collected by various internet companies and used for various business activities. Other than that, there are also hotels, banks, travel agencies, insurance companies, planes, trains, traffic police, and so on. Even every surveillance camera in the country was included. If all the information was integrated and put into the national intelligence network that Momo was currently in charge of, then no one in the country would be able to keep any secrets from the government, unless the person was completely out of touch with society. Normally, for something like this, even the government would not be able to integrate it successfully. The interests of various parties involved were so complicated that even a deity would not be able to figure them out. However, Li Onping was different. He did not need to figure out the root of the problem. He only needed to give an order, and everyone would have to follow his instructions. If there was a bottleneck, it would be easy to confirm it with the information provided by Li Qian in the existing intelligence network. Then, the bottleneck would be forcefully broken through by de Xia Dragonfinch, and it would be carried out until it was completed. In the history of mankind, there had never been a moment where the power of a country was concentrated in the hands of a single person. There had never been a moment like this where Li Onping's power alone surpassed the power of the entire country combined. This allowed any plan that could not be carried out in the past to be carried out in this environment. However, for the time being, the Xia would find a few pilot projects to run. When there were no problems, it would be expanded to the entire country and even the entire eastern continent. After Li Onping determined the integration of the intelligence network in his mind, he thought about it and decided on a few subplans such as facial recognition, full network monitoring, and satellite monitoring. This would allow the intelligence network to be even more dense. It could be imagined that when the entire intelligence network was completely spread out, everyone in society would be covered by an invisible net, tightly bound and unable to breathe. Therefore, these plans had to be carried out secretly and could not be made public. Li Onping thought that if these plans could be completed and Momo could develop artificial intelligence, then more than 90% of the government officials could be laid off. I still have to take it slow. Yang Guang saw Li Onping's gaze wandering and called out softly, "Sir." Li Onping came back to his senses and asked, "What? Then how should we deal with the holy battle this time?" A sharp glint flashed in Li Onping's eyes. "I'll leave the holy battle to you. In terms of manpower, you can let me know who you want. I only have one request. I don't want to see anything similar to this happen again." "Yes, sir." With that, Yang Guang's expression turned serious. After receiving the order, he bowed and left, leaving Yin Bei and Li Onping in the study. Li Onping looked at Yin Bei and asked, "What's the matter?" Yin Bei lowered his head and said respectfully, "It's about the Avengers. We destroyed their base in Nanjiang and captured the leader of the Avengers, Peter Parker." Li Onping said, "That's right. Is there a problem?" But last year in Jadeite City, Peter Parker saved Tian Haowen. According to our information, Tian Haowen also joined the Avengers later on. We couldn't find him this time. Tian Haowen. A series of information flashed through Li Onping's mind. In the end, it stopped at the image of Tian Haowen standing in front of the parade. If Yin Bei had not mentioned it, Li Onping would not have remembered such a small character. He said nonchalantly, "It's normal for an organization like this to have people missing after their members are scattered. Why? Is there a problem with him?" Yin Bei nodded. He thought about it and forced himself to say, "Tian Haowen asked us to release Peter Parker and all the arrested members of the Avengers. Otherwise, he will reveal the secret of the 8th Research Institute." After saying that, Yin Bei lowered his head and did not dare to look into Li Onping's eyes. As soon as he finished his sentence, Yin Bei felt a terrifying, murderous aura rushing towards him. He had experienced countless massacres in the past year, and his strength had reached the 4th energy rank. It was only at this moment that he realized how weak he was. He was like a small boat in a storm. He could be killed at any time. However, this murderous aura was only a small part of Li Onping's aura. It came and went quickly. The space returned to normal. Looking at Yin Bei, who was sweating, Li Onping frowned and said, "He already knows about the 8th Research Institute? How much does he know?" Yin Bei was still in shock. "We're not sure. We try to track his whereabouts, but he's very careful and cunning. All the calls were made using a disposable phone. Each call lasted no more than 10 seconds, and he even used a voice changer. We're not even sure if the person talking is Tian Haowen or if it's a recording of him." As one of the few people in Xia Dragonfinch who knew the inside story of the 8th Research Institute, Yin Bei knew how terrifying the darkness and the depths of this research institute was. If the situation was exposed, it would be the biggest scandal in Xia since the founding of the country. In the entire Xia Dragonfinch, other than Yin Bei, only the Qian Duduo, Yang Guang, Lu Feng, and a few other people that Li Onping thought he could tell knew part of the information. After all, as the 8th Research Institute grew bigger and bigger, the research involved would be deeper and broader. It was impossible not to arrange for aptitude users to protect it. Therefore, Li Onping chose some people into Xia Dragonfinch that he thought he could accept to help him maintain the 8th Research Institute. Yin Bei was one of them. Chapter 279. After listening to Yin Bei's words, Li Onping asked again, "Has he shown any evidence so far?" Yin Bei shook his head. "Not yet." He naturally knew that what Li Onping was talking about was the main point. So what if Tian Haowen knew some secrets of the 8th Research Institute? Ordinary people would not believe him at all. No TV station would dare to expose this information. If he exposed it on the internet, he would probably be caught by Momo immediately. Even if Tian Haowen exposed some information, Li Onping believed that Lu Feng's public relations team had enough ability to reverse this unfavorable news. Therefore, the key question was whether or not Tian Haowen had enough solid evidence. And how much evidence? Would he contact some people that Li Onping definitely did not want to know the secrets of the 8th Research Institute? After thinking about it, Li Onping ordered Yin Bei, go find Lu Feng and investigate this matter together. Don't release Peter Parker for the time being. He wanted to get more information out of Tian Haowen and see how much information he had. I'll go to the Research Institute personally. Lu Feng had been managing the intelligence system for many years and was used to seeing the dark side of the world. He had almost no resistance to the 8th Research Institute. He was also the person that Li Onping was most assured in this regard. In addition, he could freely use the intelligence resources of Xia. He was indeed a good candidate for investigation. Yin Bei nodded and went to the base to find Lu Feng. Li Onping sat in the study again and thought about the whole thing again. He then picked up the phone beside him. 10 minutes later, he walked out of the study. Xiao Xuesu was already waiting by the car. When she saw Li Onping come out, she immediately walked up and bowed. "Sir, where are you going?" "To the biotechnology company in the suburbs." After speaking, Li Onping got into the car. He sat alone in the back and closed his eyes as if he did not care about anything outside. Xiao Xuesu followed behind him and sat in the back. The car started and headed to the suburbs. The person who was arranged to drive Li Onping was obviously not an ordinary person. The whole car was driven as if it was on flat ground, and people couldn't even feel the difference between starting and stopping. It was like a ghost shuttling through the lanes. Clearly, the driver's driving skills had reached the pinnacle. No matter how bad one's motion sickness was, they wouldn't feel anything in this car. Along the way, Li Onping closed his eyes and didn't say a word. The driver and Xiao Xuesu naturally could not speak. The only difference was that Xiao Xuesu frowned from time to time. She cast a glance at Li Onping, who was resting with his eyes closed. Today, she followed Li Onping to serve him because she had a mission. After the Xiao family's patriarch, Xiao Enran, received the news yesterday, he immediately called Xiao Xuesu over. At this moment, she recalled her conversation with Xiao Enran. A photo was placed in front of Xiao Xuesu. The shot was of Claudia coming down from the specialist seat. Xiao Xuesu flipped through it and raised her head to look at Xiao Enran. Xiao Enran pointed at the photo and said, "This is the latest news we received. Claudia found Sir in New Donyang and lived with him for more than 3 months. They might have already had a relationship." He reprimanded, "We are completely behind." Xiao Xuesu was not in a hurry. She calmly analyzed, "If we are really completely behind, then Claudia should be taken to the palace now. But isn't she still living in the embassy?" She smiled and said, "This means that she might be a little ahead of us, but she didn't gain Sir's favor." Xiao Enran said unhappily, "But she is Sir's first woman. Just based on this point, Ivan too, and even the entire ice fortress can obtain a huge advantage. She just got off the plane yesterday. This morning, the 4 great aristocrats of the ice fortress have already begun to reach an agreement. And this first place should have been you." Xiao Xuesu said helplessly, "I've already tried my best, but Sir's temperament is unpredictable. There's no need to say anymore. When you start accompanying Sir tomorrow, you must do your best and think of a way to improve the relationship between the two of you. Do you understand?" Xiao Xuesu sighed. "I understand." In the car, Xiao Xuesu glanced at Li Onping, whose eyes were tightly shut. She gritted her teeth and slowly leaned her body over. Feeling her head resting on Li Onping's shoulder, Xiao Xuesu's heart began to beat faster. Of course, she was not embarrassed or shy. It was purely because she was afraid. That feeling was like putting her head next to a tiger's mouth. Xiao Xuesu knew that Li Onping would not kill her, but for some reason, she felt afraid. Xiao Xuesu did not know. First of all, it was because of the power Li Onping currently held. As the saying goes, being with a king is like being with a tiger. She was not a princess who grew up in luxury, like Claudia, so it was normal for her to feel afraid. Secondly, it was because she was an ability user, so she could understand how terrifying Li Onping was. For an ordinary person like Claudia, if Li Onping did not take the initiative to show it, she would not be able to sense Li Onping's power at all. At this moment, Li Onping suddenly opened his eyes. Xiao Xuesu was like a frightened deer. She immediately retracted her head and carefully looked at Li Onping and said, "Sir, did I disturb you?" Li Onping looked at her and said, "No. Your heart is beating fast." Your heartbeat suddenly quickened. In Li Onping's ears, Xiao Xuesu's heartbeat was like a drum, beating even faster. He continued, "Are you afraid?" Xiao Xuesu said nervously, No, it's just that I'm a little nervous." Li Onping glanced at her and closed his eyes again. "You don't have to be nervous. You can be considered an acquaintance of mine. When we talk, there's no need to be too restrained." Xiao Xuesu nodded and did not say anything. Then, she heard Li Onping continue, "If you don't want to, you can tell me now. I'll get them to replace you. I guarantee that no one will find trouble with you." Xiao Xuesu immediately raised her head, and a trace of surprise appeared in her eyes. She did not expect Li Onping to say this. She immediately said, "Sir, I don't want to leave. I just want to stay by your side and serve you forever." As she spoke, she pressed a button on the car, and a partition rose behind the driver's head, turning the back of the car into a sealed space. Xiao Xuesu hugged Li Onping tightly and pressed her entire body against his. Li Onping could even clearly feel the softness of the other party's chest. Xiao Xuesu was like a koala bear, hugging him tightly and rubbing against him. She buried her head in Li Onping's chest and said softly, "Sir, can I hug you like this when there's no one around in the future?" Looking at Xiao Xuesu's gentle appearance, Li Onping was unable to determine if what this little vixen said was true or false, but it did not matter to him. However, if he were to choose a woman, he had known Xiao Xuesu for a longer time. It was better than him changing to a random stranger. Although Xiao Xuesu did not get Li Onping's answer, she felt that Li Onping had no intention of pushing her away. She slowly exhaled in her heart, and her chest pressed closer to Li Onping. The 8th Research Institute was located in the outskirts of Tianjin. Although Xiao Xuesu had accompanied Li Onping here many times, she did not know what exactly was going on here. Every time she came, she was arranged to wait in a living room. Li Onping, on the other hand, went deep underground alone. The electronic door opened, and Sherwin appeared in front of Li Onping. His hair was like a bird's nest, and his deeply sunken eyes showed how tired he had been recently. However, his eyes were very bright, and it was obvious that he was in good spirits. When he saw Li Onping appear in front of him, he immediately laughed. "Haha, I was just about to inform you to come over. There has been a huge breakthrough in our human cloning project. Now, the clones with abilities can improve their own abilities." Oh, Li Onping did not expect Sherwin to have such a huge breakthrough in the 8th Research Institute. He looked at the doctor behind Sherwin and asked, "Is it true?" The doctor nodded. "We have already created 10 samples. Although the degree of improvement is different, the limit data of their abilities has indeed improved to different degrees." Li Onping nodded. He had wanted to investigate personally to see how the matter of the 8th Research Institute had been leaked. However, it was such a coincidence that the human cloning technology had also made a breakthrough at this time. He could not help but think about the connection. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.